The Life of Shoto Todoroki, My Hero Academia. A hero of ice and fire. That's right, it's Shoto Todoroki. We're going to be covering his life from beginning to end. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish new videos every week, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. If you didn't already know, only 20% of you actually have subscribed to the channel, so if you actually like the video, please subscribe to this channel to show your support. And with that out of the way, let's get started. Background. Shoto's father, Enji Todoroki, was always overshadowed by All Might and viewed as the number 2 hero, regardless of his impressive crime-solving record. Enji developed an obsession with surpassing All Might to the point of forcing a quirk marriage upon Rei Todoroki in order to conceive a child strong enough to be capable of surpassing All Might. None of Shoto's siblings were able to live up to this standard, and Shoto became known as his masterpiece. When he was 5 years old, Shoto started to receive training from his father because of his half-cold, half-hot quirk. However, Endeavor's methods were too harsh, pushing Shoto to the brink of sickness. Rei would try to defend him, but Endeavor would ignore her protests and beat her in front of Shoto. Endeavor also prevented Shoto from interacting with his siblings, who were free from training and allowed to play. Shoto soon began to despise his training and resented Endeavor for abusing him and his mother. During those times, Rei was always there to support him. Despite the abuse she and her son suffered, she still encouraged Shoto to become a hero. One night, they were watching a TV special featuring All Might. He encouraged children to make their powers their own, even if they inherited their parents' abilities. Agreeing with All Might's advice, Rei told Shoto that he was not a prisoner of his bloodline and could use his powers to become whoever he desired, regardless of Endeavor being his father. However, Rei eventually began to break down under domestic abuse, finding it traumatic to even look at Shoto's left side because it reminded her of Endeavor. One day, Shoto overheard her while she was talking with their mother over the phone about recognizing that she no longer had the mental stability to raise her son. Startled by his sudden appearance and triggered by his red hair, she snapped and poured a kettle over his head, giving him a severe burn over the left side of his face. Rei realized what she had done and tearfully tried to heal him using her ice quirk. Sometime after this incident, Shoto asked Endeavor where his mother was, to which he coldly replied that he sent her to the hospital for hurting him. Shoto blamed Endeavor, saying that everything that had happened was his fault. Afterwards, Shoto began to forget about his mother's supportive words. Shoto's dark upbringing left him to focus on nothing but rejecting his father. He became cold and distant from other people. Shoto participated in the UA recommendation entrance exam, where he encountered Inasa Yoarashi. Inasa tried to ask Shoto about his father, but was totally blown off. Both of them raced in the same leg of the practical exam, Inasa just barely taking first place in front of Shoto. Inasa tried to befriend Shoto yet again, but Shoto insults him and tells him to get out of his way. Quirk Apprehension Test Arc. On the first day at UA High School in Class 1A, Shoto manages to score second on the Quirk Apprehension test given to the class by their teacher, Shota Aizawa. Battle Trial Arc. The next day of school, All Might gives the class a basic hero training lesson. He announces that the class will take part in combat training and instructs them to suit up in their hero costumes. Shoto is paired with Mezzo Shoji. During Katsuki Bakugo and Izuku Midoriya's fight, Shoto is surprised by Katsuki's cleverness and motor skills in using his explosions. For the second match, Shoto and Mezzo are the heroes against Mashira Ojiro and Toru Hagakure as the villains. Mezzo tells Shoto the locations of their enemies and reveals they're both barefooted and is likely looking to ambush them. Shoto instructs Mezzo to exit the building for his own safety and then freezes it with his quirk. Mashirao and Toru end up frozen to the ground, and Shoto walks into the room to confront both of them. Mashirao takes a fighting stance, and Shoto warns him that if he moves, he'll rip the skin off the bottom of his feet. With both of his opponents frozen, Shoto effortlessly walks past them and touches the fake weapon to secure Team B's victory. He tells Mashirao not to feel bad about his loss because they're simply playing on different levels of skill. USJ Arc. During their next homeroom class, Class 1A is instructed to choose a class president, and Tenya Ida suggests that they take it to a vote. Unlike the majority of the class, Shoto doesn't vote for himself and instead votes for Momo Yaoyorozu. In Hero Basic Training Class, Class 1A is assigned to rescue training in an off-campus facility. During the bus ride there, many of his classmates discuss their quirks while Shoto remains in the back of the bus with his eyes closed. Eijiro Kirishima comments that Shoto's quirk is perfect for becoming a famous hero. The class reaches the training facility, Unforeseen Simulation Joint, and are greeted by Space Hero 13, who built the facility. It was built as a training area for aspiring heroes to practice using their quirks to save people. However, rescue training is interrupted by the arrival of several villains. While many of his classmates are paralyzed with fear, Shoto surmises that the villains have a quirk user among their ranks that can jam communications. He figures that the villains have a concrete objective in mind, understanding that no villain would plan this ambush without a scheme in mind. Shoto tries to evacuate with his class, but they're separated and warped into different simulation zones of the USJ. Shoto ends up in the landslide zone and immediately freezes the villains waiting for him there. He taunts them, saying they should be ashamed for being easily bested by a child. More villains attack, but Shoto easily counters and incapacitates them as well. He warns the villains that if their bodies remain frozen, they'll die. He offers to unfreeze them in exchange for information on their objectives. One of the fearful thugs tells Shoto they came to the USJ to kill All Might. Shoto makes his way to the central plaza to find All Might trapped by Kurogiri and a Nomu. Shoto freezes half of Nomu's body to help All Might get free, and boasts that the symbol of peace will not die on this day. After getting up, All Might refuses any help from the students, so Shoto stays back and watches in awe of All Might's incredible power as he defeats Nomu. Shoto believes All Might will handle the rest of the villains as well, and decides to stay back, but Izuku Midoriya rushes to help All Might. Just as Kurogiri and Tomura Shigaraki attack, Tenya returns to the USJ with pro-heroes as reinforcements. The villains are forced to retreat, and Shoto gathers outside the facility with his classmates. He overhears Toru talking with Mashirao about the battle in the landslide zone. She talks about how amazing Shoto was, but he thinks to himself about how he never even noticed she was there, and how he could have accidentally frozen her. Afterward, Shoto and the others return to school. UA Sports Festival Arc. 2 days after the attack on the USJ, Shoto and his classmates return to school and are lectured about the importance of the upcoming UA Sports Festival during their homeroom class. At lunch, Shoto's interest is piqued when he overhears Ochako Uraraka and Tenya talking about All Might taking a liking to Izuku. As the school day ends, Class 1A is unable to leave their class thanks to the mob of students blocking the exit. The students are from other classes and are there to scope out their competition for the festival. Katsuki makes them all angry with his arrogant comments, putting a target on the backs of the students in Class 1A. For the next 2 weeks, Shoto and his classmates train in order to prepare for the sports festival. When the day comes, Shoto and his classmates prepare in their designated waiting area by changing into their PE clothes. Shoto approaches Izuku and tells him that despite All Might's interest in Izuku, Shoto believes he is obviously the stronger of the two. He goes on to express his intentions to defeat Izuku in the sports festival. Eijiro tries to defuse the tension, but Shoto refuses him and reminds everyone that the festival is not a team effort. Before Shoto leaves, Izuku admits that although Shoto is stronger, he will still try his best to come out on top in the festival. Shoto stoically accepts the challenge and leaves the room with the rest of his class to enter the arena. Once Midnight explains the rules and directs the pledge, the preliminary games begin. The first round is an obstacle race 4 kilometers around the area. Shoto gets a head start when he freezes the cluttered corridor, but is surprised to find that many students were able to avoid his attack. Several giant villain bots then appear to block his path. Shoto surmises that these are the same bots that the students who took the entrance exam had to face. While impressed by the obstacle, Shoto wishes the UA facility could have offered him something more difficult since his father's watching. Shoto proceeds to freeze the robot while it's off balance and run past it as it falls and blocks the way of those behind him in the race. Keeping his early lead, Shoto easily clears the next obstacle, the fall. It's a large canyon that must be tracked by crossing tight ropes. Shoto freezes a path through the fall but notices Katsuki gaining on him. Shoto reaches the final leg of the race, a minefield meant to burden those in the lead. He has to walk through the area carefully, allowing Katsuki to catch up to him. Angered, Katsuki states that Shoto issued his declaration of war to the wrong rival, and the two start fighting for the first place as they run. Moments later, Shoto watches in bewilderment as Izuku flies towards him and Katsuki after riding the momentum from an explosion he created. Izuku manages to pass them, but Shoto catches up to him quickly by creating an ice path. Shoto realizes this will help others cross the minefield, but he has no choice if he wants to win the race. Before he and Katsuki are able to reclaim the lead, Izuku triggers another explosion that momentarily stops them both. Although close behind, Shoto crosses the finish line second after Izuku. Even though he's unhappy about not taking first place, Shoto qualifies for the second event, the cavalry battle. After Midnight explains the rules of the cavalry battle, Shoto forms his team with Tenya, Momo, and Denki Kaminari. He explains that this is the strongest formation he could think of. After Shoto explains his strategy to the team, Tenya asks if Shoto will use ice and fire to create diversions. As he responds, Shoto looks into the stands at his father. Shoto claims he never uses his left side in battle. Shortly after the cavalry battle begins, Team Todoroki confronts Team Midoriya. Rival teams rush to the scene as well, forcing Shoto to make a move. He orders Denki to electrocute the other teams while using his insulation sheet created by Momo to protect himself. Afterwards, he freezes the opposing teams and takes a few of their headbands. Shota notes that Shoto is adapting his strategy because he was surprised by how many people evaded his attack in the obstacle race. Even though Shoto's team corners Team Midoriya, Izuku has them keep their distance and remain on Shoto's left side. In this position, Shoto is unable to freeze them without hitting his own teammates. With time running low, Tenya uses his Recipro Burst special move, and in an instant, Shoto takes Team Midoriya's headband. Tenya's special move leaves their team immobilized, giving Team Midoriya the chance to try and reclaim the headband. Izuku charges at Shoto with his quirk, and Shoto instinctively uses the fire from his left arm to try and counter. Izuku uses his quirk to break Shoto's defense and steal a headband, albeit not the 10 million points one because Shoto switched the headbands around to trick Izuku. But he's too busy berating himself for using his left side to boast. Time continues to run down and Team Bakugo joins the fray. Both teams Bakugo and Midoriya make one final effort at the 10 million points, but time runs out. Although, Shoto doesn't notice that Fumikage Tokoyami steals the headband off of his head. Afterwards, Shoto is angry with himself for using his left side and decides to confront Izuku at the student entrance. At first, Shoto uses silence to intimidate Izuku, and when he finally speaks, says that the power that came from Izuku during the cavalry battle was the same as All Might's. Then, much to Izuku's shock, Shoto asks if he's All Might's secret love child. Izuku tries to explain that's not the case, but Shoto figures out that there's a secret connection between the two. Continuing, Shoto says that because he's the son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, he has even more reason to defeat Izuku. Shoto explains to Izuku that Endeavor is obsessed with defeating All Might, and although he was never able to do it, he's still trying to through Shoto. Shoto reveals that he was born out of a quirk marriage, and explains some of his past. Endeavor used his money to buy out Rei's family to implement a quirk marriage, with the intent of creating a powerful child to surpass All Might. All of Shoto's memories of his mother are of her crying, as well as when she called his left side unbearable and poured boiling water on his face. Shoto tells Izuku all of this to explain his reason for picking a fight with him. Shoto wishes to reject his father and his left side, and plans to win the sports festival using only his right side. As Shoto walks away, Izuku explains his own reasons for wanting to win, and then promises to do his best to defeat Shoto. Later on, Midnight announces the sports festival finals will be a one-on-one fighting tournament. Shoto notices that he could face Izuku in the second bracket and hopes that he wins. During the recreational games, Shoto uses the opportunity to mentally prepare himself. Following Izuku's match with Hitoshi Shinso, Shoto comments that he figured Izuku would win. On his way to the ring for his match against Hantasero, Shoto encounters his father. Enji calls Shoto's behavior disgraceful and says that if he had used his fire, he could have easily crushed the past 2 events. He goes on to say that Shoto needs to end his childish rebellion and see to his duty to surpass All Might. He calls Shoto his greatest masterpiece, far superior to his siblings. Shoto responds that surpassing All Might is all his father ever has to say and declares that he will only use his mother's quirk to win. Shoto replies that Shoto will soon discover the limits to that power. Enji's words infuriate Shoto, and he carries this anger with him into the fight. As the match begins, Hanta nearly throws Shoto out of bounds by wrapping him in tape and swinging him towards the margin line. Shoto fiercely retaliates by freezing Hanta in a humongous pillar of ice and frees himself by breaking through the now frozen tape. Hanta is immobilized and Shoto is declared the winner. The former comments on how Shoto went overboard, and Shoto apologizes and explains that he was angry, and uses his left side to melt Hanta out of the ice. 6 matches later, Shoto watches Katsuki's battle with Ochako closely. Once the first round of matches ends, Shoto takes to the ring and meets his second round opponent, Izuku. As soon as their fight begins, Shoto leads with an ice attack, but Izuku encounters with a Delaware smash. Shoto creates a block of ice behind him to keep him from being blown out of bounds, as he expected Izuku to injure himself in order to destroy the ice. Shoto persistently attacks until Izuku breaks all of the fingers on his left hand. Shoto withstands the smash and creates a tower of ice to run up and close the distance between them. Izuku uses another smash to break the ice steps apart, but Shoto avoids it and nearly freezes Izuku at close range. In order to break the ice that is slowly freezing him, Izuku sacrifices his entire left hand and lets off a full-powered smash. Shoto withstands the aftershock of the smash using an ice blockade. While recovering, Shoto notes that this attack from Izuku was significantly more powerful than the previous ones, and that he realizes his opponent is trying to keep him at a distance. Izuku is startled by Shoto's combat awareness, and some viewing fans even comment that Shoto is already stronger than the average pro hero. Questioning Izuku's durability, Shoto asks if he's already too worn out from defending against the ice. Izuku doesn't respond and instead notices that Shoto's shaking because of the frost building up on the right side of his body. Shoto apologizes for the intensity of the battle and thanks Izuku for helping him irritate Endeavor by using only ice rather than fire. Understanding that Izuku has no healthy fingers left, Shoto sends an ice attack at him that he expects to finish the match. Shoto's shocked when Izuku declares that he's not finished yet and uses his already broken finger to counter the ice once again. Shoto asks why Izuku is going so far, to which he replies that Shoto is trembling, pointing out that Shoto's body can only take so much cold because quirks are physical abilities. He also surmises that Shoto could offset his temperature by using his fire, but knows Shoto refuses to do so. He challenges Shoto to put more effort into the battle, stating that everyone else is giving it their all while Shoto is only using half his power. Izuku provokes Shoto by claiming that he has yet to injure him in this battle, demanding that Shoto uses his full strength. Agitated, Shoto asks Izuku if Endeavor bribed him. He rushes Izuku, albeit much slower than before because of the frost building on his body. Shoto closes in on Izuku, but as soon as he lifts his right foot to attack, Izuku strikes him in the torso. Shoto is partially able to freeze Izuku's arm, but is still sent flying away. Shoto recovers and tries to use another ice attack, but it's much slower than the previous ones, and Izuku is able to avoid it. They both move into closer quarters and fight in spite their afflictions. As Izuku dashes at Shoto, the latter attempts to freeze him. Without any fingers left to use, Izuku pulls back his thumb using his cheek in order to release another smash to blast Shoto away. Shoto asks again why Izuku is putting himself through so much pain, to which his opponent replies that he's prepared to do whatever it takes to become a hero. Izuku headbutts Shoto and challenges him to use his full strength again, telling him to stop screwing around because even if he wants to reject his father, Shoto doesn't have the right to be the best if he's not prepared to do his best. Izuku's words make Shoto recall the terrible memories of his past. As more frost covers his body, Shoto remembers him and his mother being abused by Endeavor, as well as the time where he pleaded to his mother about not wanting to become like his father, to which she replied by asking if Shoto still wanted to become a hero. Izuku capitalizes and strikes Shoto with another punch, and declares that he will surpass him. While reeling from the attack, Shoto is reminded of his childhood. Still haunted, Shoto states once again that he will reject his father, but this time Izuku adds that Shoto's quirk is his own. This invokes one last memory, one that Shoto had long forgotten. He and his mother were sitting down watching a special on TV about All Might, who encouraged all children to use their quirks in their own way in spite of inheriting them from their parents. Rei added that Shoto must remember to stay true to himself, that he's not a prisoner of his lineage, and that it was okay to use his power to become who he wants to be. Impassioned, Shoto ignites his flames and astounds the entire arena with his display of blazing power. When the flames die down a bit and the ice melts from Shoto's body, he says that now Izuku's the one screwing around for helping his opponent. Shoto adds that just like Izuku, he desires to become a hero one day too. Having freed Shoto from his self-repression, Izuku smiles and comments that Shoto's power is amazing, to which he responds with an affecting smile of his own. With the battle reaching its climax, Shoto asks why Izuku's grinning in such a hopeless situation and pleads for Izuku not to blame him for what happens next. They both build up in preparation for one final clash. Cementos and Midnight decide to step in, legitimately fearing one of them might die. Shoto sends a large wave of ice at Izuku, and the latter evades by jumping above it. As he flies towards Shoto, he prepares a full power smash in his healthy arm, and Shoto counterattacks with a powerful fire blast. Just before he uses the fire attack, Shoto thanks Izuku. Even though Cementos builds a wall between them, Shoto's fire attack and Izuku's wind pressure creates an explosion that destroys the entire fighting ring. The smoke clears, and Izuku is revealed to be unconscious outside the ring. Everyone is taken aback by the battle's outcome, and Shoto stands victorious with half his shirt burned off. Shoto exits the arena and encounters his father in the corridor. He praises Shoto for using his left side, but tells him he needs to control it. Angie offers Shoto the chance to become his sidekick after graduation, but Shoto ignores it and reveals he hasn't rescinded his disavowal of his father. He says the only reason he used his left side is that he forgot about Endeavor during that moment completely. As he walks away, Shoto says he remains unsure about his firepower and suggests he may not need Endeavor at all. Once the second round finishes, Shoto returns to the arena with a new uniform to face off against Tenya. He starts the match by trapping Tenya between two rows of ice. He goes in for the win using another ice attack, but Tenya evades using a standing long jump and activates his Recipro Burst technique in mid-air. Shoto is able to evade Tenya's initial roundhouse kick, but falls victim to the subsequent attack thanks to Tenya's blinding speed. Tenya tries to swiftly carry Shoto out of bounds, but is stopped suddenly. He realizes that his engines have been frozen, and questions when Shoto did so. Shoto reveals that it was after getting hit with Tenya's second kick, and suggests that Tenya had forgotten his ability to freeze with precision because he's only been showing off ranged attacks during the festival. After freezing Tenya's body completely, Shoto admits that his opponent's Recipro Burst was too fast to dodge. Midnight declares him the winner, and he advances to the final round. After Katsuki advances to the finals as well, Shoto meets his menacing glare. They meet in the waiting area when Katsuki accidentally barges into the wrong room. Before Katsuki interrupted him, Shoto was mulling over the conflicting memories of his mother's breakdown and Izuku's encouragement. Katsuki tries to intimidate Shoto by slightly blasting the table and warning him to do his best. Mostly unfazed, Shoto replies that Izuku told him the same thing, and comments that he was foolish for focusing more on helping him than winning their fight. He asks Katsuki if Izuku was helping during their childhood, but this only infuriates the former. Katsuki kicks over the table and yells for Shoto to ignore Izuku and his family issues so that he can use his fire during their bout. He angrily exits the room and states he wants everyone to know he can beat Shoto at full strength. Their battle begins with Shoto using a more controlled version of the giant ice attack he defeated Hanta with. Katsuki endures the ice blast by tunneling through it using his explosions. Katsuki rushes Shoto and Shoto moves to counterattack, but Katsuki evades using a mid-air explosion and grabs into Shoto's left side and throws him. Shoto creates and surfs an ice wave to avoid going out of bounds. Katsuki attacks again and Shoto is able to stop him by evading his blast and grabbing onto his forearm. Rather than simply using the flames on his left arm, the same arm he used to grab Katsuki, he simply tosses him away. Shoto mulls over his opponent's words, internally apologizing to Katsuki because he's still unsure about what his left side means to him to use it. Then suddenly, Shoto is once again encouraged by a shouting Izuku, who tells him not to give up and to do his best. Impassioned once again, Shoto ignites his flames and prepares to counter Katsuki's next move. Katsuki readies his special move, Howitzer Impact, but Shoto is haunted by memories of his parents and decides to extinguish the flames and leave himself completely open to Katsuki's powerful explosion. Shoto is knocked out of bounds, and Katsuki is declared the winner. At the Sports Festival award ceremony, Shoto is presented with the silver medal by All Might, and he inquires to why Shoto refused to use his fire. Shoto replies that although Izuku opened his eyes, he still doubts himself and believes his path to become a hero is still clouded. He also mentions that he understands why All Might has such an interest in Izuku. After returning to class, Shoto and the rest of Class 1A are excused from the next 2 days of class. The next day, Shoto decides to visit his mother in the psychiatric ward, much to his sister's disapproval. Throughout his life, Shoto believed the sight of him would only cause his mother more pain, so he never visited her. Nevertheless, Shoto needed closure from his mother so that he could continue on his path to becoming a hero without anything holding him back. He musters up the courage to approach her and resolves to talk over everything and free her from the ward's custody. Versus Hero Killer Arc. Once class resumes at UA, Shoto joins his class in learning about hero informatics. Shoto reveals the Pro Hero draft results, with Shoto leading the entire class with 4,123 offers from pros. Midnight joins the class to help the students choose their hero names. Shoto opts to choose his own first name for his codename. After choosing codenames concludes, Aizawa informs the students that they will choose a hero agency to intern at for a week from a list of their nominations. Shoto notices that his father's workplace is among his choices. When the first day of the internships arrive, Shoto meets with his class at the train station to get his new costume and travel to the office of his choice. Before he departs, Shoto notices that Tenya appears to be unsettled by news of his brother's assault at the hands of the hero killer, Stain. Shoto reaches Endeavor's agency and gets greeted by his father. He claims Shoto has finally chosen to follow him, but Shoto refutes that, saying that he's following his own path. Endeavor immediately decides to take Shoto out into the field, and they leave for Hosu City to track down the hero killer. While in Hosu, Shoto and his father notice an explosion in the distance. Endeavor rushes towards the event, but Shoto receives a message on his cell phone from Izuku with a location on it. He tells his father to go handle the event while he heads to the location, and requests for his father to send him reinforcements. Shoto arrives at a location just in time to save Tenya from Stain, and forces the villain back using a blast of fire. He then scolds Izuku for not supplying any more details on his message since he was almost too late. Shoto tells Izuku that he figured out his message was likely a cry for help and that pro-heroes are on the way. He uses waves of ice to keep Stain at bay while securing his allies at the same time. Stain evades another stream of fire, and Shoto declares he will not allow the hero killer to take any more lives. Izuku warns Shoto that Stain's quirk can paralyze him if he gets some of his blood. Shoto plans to fight at a distance, but Stain catches him off guard and nearly takes his head off with a throwing knife. Shoto narrowly moves his head out of the way and the blade cuts his face open. Stain attacks Shoto from above, but he blocks it using a block of ice. Shoto notices that Stain threw his katana at the same time as a distraction. Shoto's opponent grabs the collar of his costume and almost brings him close enough to lick the blood from his cheek, but Shoto uses his flames in time to repel him. Stain praises Shoto for his strength and is forced back by combination attacks of both fire and ice. Tenya pleads for Shoto to stop because Ingenium must be the one who defeats the hero killer. Shoto replies that his statement's strange because he never saw the scowl of vengeance on Ingenium's face that he sees on Tenya, and he knows there's a lot going on behind the scenes in his family as well. He creates a giant wall of ice, but Stain slashes through it and tells Shoto that it's foolish to block his own view when his opponent is farther than him. Stain then stabs Shoto's left eye with 2 throwing knives and moves above him. Just as he's about to stab Shoto from above, Izuku unexpectedly grabs him and tackles him away. Shoto guesses that Stain's quirk may have a time limit, but Native explains that Izuku was the last to suffer from it, so that can't be the case. Izuku comes to the conclusion that Stain's quirk's effectiveness varies depending on blood type, which the hero killer confirms. Shoto states that he would have liked to carry the injured away, but Stain will not give him the opening to do so. He and Izuku decide to hold the villain off until reinforcements arrive. With Shoto already bleeding, Izuku volunteers himself to fight in close quarters while Shoto supports him from a distance. Although reluctant to take the risk, Shoto agrees to protect Tenya and Native together with Izuku. He recalls worrying about Tenya ever since Ingenium was attacked because he recognizes someone who's acting on pent-up resentment. Shoto also knows too well how that negativity can cloud someone's judgment. He remembers visiting his mother and how it cleared up his own perception of her. He told her everything that happened, as she apologized for burning him and forgave Shoto for not visiting her for a long time, as she understood his reasons. She also encouraged him to move forward in his life without anything holding him back, as that would be her salvation. That's why he decided to intern with Endeavor's agency, not because he's forgiven his father, but because he wishes to learn from the experience of the number 2 hero. Shoto realizes now that everything could have been simpler for him, but never noticed until Izuku opened his eyes with just a few words. With the battle's intensity increasing, Stain heightens his strength and overpowers Izuku. He cuts open his leg and licks the blood to paralyze him. Shoto tries to support him, but Tenya again pleads for them to stop. Shoto rejects his plea and tells Tenya to stand up if he wants them to stop. Stain dashes towards Shoto, evading the ice the latter sends at him. Stain slashes through a wall of ice and goes to attack Shoto, who responds by releasing his fire and encourages Tenya to never forget who he wants to become. As Shoto tries to force Stain back, the villain inches closer to him every time he evades a stream of flames. Shoto uses his ice as well, but Stain's too fast and closes the distance between them. The hero killer comments that Shoto is careless because he's too focused on his quirk and nearly takes him out using his katana. Tenya breaks free from the paralysis in time, using his Recipro Burst to break the katana and kick Stain flying back. Tenya apologizes for getting his friends involved as he states his eyes have been opened, but Stain refutes this and states that Tenya will never reform into a true hero. Shoto tells Tenya not to listen to the villain's words, but Tenya agrees that he's not a true hero. Nevertheless, Tenya believes he can't give up or else the name of Ingenium will die. Stain attacks again, but Shoto forces him back using his fire. Native urges Shoto to flee, but he refuses and says that Stain will not give him an opening. Although Shoto realizes that Stain's quirk isn't especially effective in a battle against multiple opponents, he notes that Stain has only gotten more tenacious in his attempts to kill his targets. While Shoto keeps Stain at bay using ranged fire attacks, Tenya asks him if he can regulate temperature. Shoto responds by admitting he's not used to doing so with his left side yet, but Tenya asks him to freeze his legs without blocking the exhausts. Annoyed with Shoto's interference, Stain maneuvers behind him and throws a knife at his head. Tenya moves in front of the blade and it stabs him in the arm and gets pinned down by a second knife. This gives Shoto enough time to do as Tenya asks and cools down the exhausts on his legs. This allows Tenya to unveil his new special move, Recipro Extend. Then Tenya and Izuku rush Stain by using their quirks to scale the alleyway and strike the hero killer simultaneously. Stain reels back from the students' teamwork and tries to slash Tenya, but he evades and kicks the villain higher into the air. Realizing that this is his chance, Shoto blasts Stain and finally connects with a stream of fire. He secures his allies by using ice to lighten their falls and tells them to get ready to continue fighting. However, Shoto looks up and sees they've actually defeated their opponent. Shoto restrains the defeated hero killer using rope and follows Tenya and Native carrying Izuku out to the street. He comments that they barely won 3-on-1 with Stain, making several mistakes, and that it's likely Stain became flustered and forgot Izuku's recovery time, making him unable to compensate for the last joint assault. They are met with several pro-heroes who offer to call an ambulance and the police. Tenya cries and takes a moment to ask for his friend's forgiveness, and Shoto says that Tenya is the class president and needs to pull himself together. Then suddenly, the last Nomu swoops down from the sky and snares Izuku. Before it gets too far away, Stain recovers and uses his quirk to stop it. Then he saves Izuku by grabbing him and stabbing Nomu's brain. In spite of being heavily injured, Stain states that the fake pro-heroes and the pathetic criminals in society must be purged to create a more just society. Shoto and everyone are taken aback by his actions. Stain challenges all the heroes to try and stop him. The bandages over his face fall off and he releases a malicious aura that paralyzes everyone with fear, including Shoto. The hero killer prepares to attack, but his perforated legs cause him to lose consciousness. Shoto, Izuku, and Tenya are taken to Hosu General Hospital and spend most of the night without sleep. The next morning, the trio discuss their encounter with the hero killer, and Shoto claims that he likely spared their lives. Their conversation is interrupted when the chief of Hosu City Police, Kenji Suragame, arrives. He informs them that Stain is undergoing treatment for his injuries, and because they acted on their own without permission, they must be punished. Shoto is outraged at the idea that the police expected he and his peers to follow the law and allow people to die as a result, arguing that it's the job of a hero to save others. He nearly lashes out, but Gran Torino stops him and pleads for him to hear Kenji out. Since there were not enough witnesses to report the incident regarding Stain, the incident will remain undisclosed. However, as a result, Izuku, Shoto, and Tenya will not get any recognition for their valiant efforts. After Kenji shows his gratitude, Shoto says that the chief should have led the conversation with that, and the trio thank him for pardoning them. The following day, when Izuku returns to their room, Shoto informs Izuku that Tenya got his medical results back. Tenya reveals that his hand was badly damaged in the battle, and it will not heal, and it serves as a reminder of his unheroic deeds. Izuku promises to do the same, and they make a pact to become stronger. Shoto apologizes for supposedly being cursed, as it seems that whenever he's involved in a skirmish, his friend's hands get messed up. Izuku and Tenya are surprised that Shoto can crack a joke, but he claims to be completely serious, calling himself a hand crusher and leading the young heroes to laugh together. When the week concludes and the internship ends, Shoto returns to UA High. His peers question Izuku, Tenya, and himself about the incident in Hosu. Sworn to silence by the police chief, Shoto covers up the truth and says Endeavor saved them all from Stain. In their next basic hero training class, the class participates in rescue races. During the first race, Shoto notices Izuku's new moves are very similar to the way Katsuki flies around using his explosions. Final Exams Arc. 1 week before the final exams, Aizawa reminds Class 1A to study for the written and practical components before ending class. Denki and Mina admit they haven't studied at all because of the events that have taken place throughout the term. Having placed 5th on the midterms, Shoto comments that if they paid attention in class, they wouldn't have a problem, leaving Denki sad. During lunch, Shoto sits with Izuku, Tenya, Ochako, Tsuyu Asui, and Toru. He listens as they discuss what they believe the practical test will contain. They learn from Itsuka Kendo that the test may consist of fighting against robotic villains. Back in class, Denki and Mina are delighted by this, but Katsuki is annoyed by their behavior. He yells at them, and then openly claims that he will receive a better grade than both Shoto and Izuku before storming out. A week passes, and Class 1A finishes the written section of the finals. They change into their hero costumes and join their teachers at the practical exam area. There, Principal Nezu announces the practical portion will involve pairs of students facing off against one teacher. Shoto is paired with Momo Yaoyorozu. Prior to that day, the teachers discussed the pairings. Aizawa states he paired Shoto with Momo because they both relied too heavily on their quirks, so he would erase them. After the first 3 matches conclude, Shoto and Momo meet in a replica city. He asks if Momo is nervous about fighting their homeroom teacher and says he has a plan. The match begins and they run through the city. Shoto instructs Momo to keep making small objects so they will notice when Aizawa is nearby, and once he is, Shoto plans to distract him while Momo runs for the exit. He instructs Momo not to get separated from him until then. Momo reluctantly agrees and they continue on. She makes Russian Matryoshka dolls, prompting Shoto to tell her if he notices anything strange. She commends Shoto for coming up with a quick plan, but he replies that it's nothing special. Momo suddenly stops and tells Shoto that although they both started as students who got into UA through recommendations, she hasn't done anything to stand out like he has. Shoto interrupts, noticing that she's stopped producing the dolls. They realize that Aizawa is close, but he surprises them when he reveals himself hanging from a power line. Shoto tries to freeze him, but Aizawa has erased his quirk. He kicks at Aizawa and tells Momo to run, but is quickly restrained by his teacher. Disappointed in Shoto's plan, Aizawa says he was planning to catch Shoto anyway and hangs him from the power lines. Shoto replies that he could burn or freeze his restraints at any time, but Aizawa throws caltrops below him. Aizawa also mentions that Shoto should have talked over his plan more with Momo. Aizawa leaves and Shoto ponders his words, recalling that Momo wanted to say something earlier about the plan. Momo returns shortly after and apologizes, but Shoto warns her Aizawa is in pursuit. Momo becomes nervous and indecisive, so Shoto decides to ask her if she has an idea. He apologizes for not talking it over. Momo claims her plan can't work if Shoto's failed, but Shoto claims that Momo is more fit to planning. Shoto reveals that he believes in her leadership so strongly that he voted for her to be class president. Shoto's words help reinvigorate Momo's confidence. She throws the dolls at Aizawa, revealing the flash grenades inside. The explosion of light gives Momo enough time to free Shoto, and she claims to have a special plan to defeat their homeroom teacher. Shoto asks Momo what her idea is, but Aizawa interrupts and attacks them. Shoto tries to counter using his fire, only to realize his quirk has been erased again. Momo instructs them to run and find a place to hide outside of Aizawa's field of vision. As they're running, they discuss how Aizawa's quirk has weakened since the attack on the USJ, and Momo states that it's a bad idea to assume they can't use their quirks. Aizawa closes in on them, and Momo says there'll be a moment when their quirks will come back. When that moment comes and Aizawa blinks, Shoto attacks using his giant ice wall technique. Now protected by the giant ridge of ice, Shoto asks what Momo's plan is. He awkwardly turns around to notice her opening her shirt to create a weapon similar to Aizawa's scarf. She replies it's slightly modified to her own version, and goes on to share her plan with Shoto. He doesn't object and they run from behind the ice wearing dark cloaks. Aizawa moves quickly and restrains them with his capture weapon, but Momo reveals their upper bodies were only mannequins. She creates a catapult and uses the opening to send the weapon at him. Shoto uses his flames to heat the weapon made from shape memory alloy, causing it to tighten and bind Aizawa. They handcuff their teacher soon after, and Shoto questions if his plan went too smoothly. Momo admits she initially missed the catapult lever, giving Aizawa an opening to stop them. When she asks why Aizawa hesitated, he claims to have been cautious of Shoto because he was still cloaked at the time. Shoto thanks Momo for her plan, and she starts to get teary-eyed. He asks if she feels sick and offers advice, but she says it's nothing. After all practical exams conclude, Class 1A returns to class the next day. Shoto learns he passed both the written and practical portions of the finals, and will attend training camp over the summer. His classmates opt to go to the mall to prepare, but Shoto decides to visit his mother instead. Forest Training Camp Arc. A day prior to summer break, Izuku invites Shoto and the other boys from Class 1A to the pool for endurance training. They hold competitive swimming races, and Shoto wins his leg by freezing the pool instead of actually swimming. Just before Shoto, Izuku, and Katsuki compete in the final race, Aizawa arrives and tells them they're out of time to use the pool and kicks them out. Afterwards, Shoto, Tenya, and Izuku recall their battle with Stain and how far they've come as budding heroes in the making. Summer break begins and Class 1A rides a bus to a forest reserve belonging to the hero team, the Wild Wild Pussycats. Pixie Bob and Mandalay introduce themselves and challenge the students to reach base camp past the forest in 3 hours. When most of Shoto's peers refuse, he and his class are forcibly thrown into Beast's Forest by Pixie Bob's quirk. A monster created from dirt clods immediately attacks Minoru Mineta. Shoto works together with Izuku, Katsuki, and Tenya to defeat it. Class 1A works together to fight their way through Beast's Forest. They encounter several different dirt monsters. Shoto and Katsuki take one out together, much to Katsuki's displeasure. Class 1A doesn't arrive at base camp for several more hours. Well over their time limit, Class 1A arrives at the base camp exhausted and battered. Mandalay reveals the time limit was the expectancy for actual heroes. Mandalay's nephew Kota punches Izuku in his groin. Katsuki says the boy is precocious, and Shoto compares the two to each other. The Pussycats serve the students dinner and the boys bathe in the hot springs afterward. Training begins the next day. Shoto trains by sitting in a pot of bath water and changes its temperature by constantly switching between fire and ice. Later that day, the students are tasked with cooking curry for themselves. Shoto uses his fire to light several of the stoves, including one for Ochako and Mina. He smiles because he's able to use his fire without restraint and can use it to help others. After another day of training, Shoto asks Izuku why he asked Aizawa about All Might. He gives Izuku advice on handling a delicate situation with Kota. Shoto tells him that actions inspire others, not just words. That night, Shoto and Katsuki are paired together for the test of courage. Class 1A students roam the forest while Class 1B students try to scare them. The duo is slightly shaken by a duo of Yui Kodai and Ragdoll. Meanwhile, the League of Villains Vanguard Action Squad attacks the camp. Shoto, carrying an injured Kosei Subaraba, runs through the forest with Katsuki. While going back to the facility, Shoto and Katsuki encounter Moonfish, admiring a severed arm on the ground. The villain turns his attention to Katsuki and Shoto. Katsuki rushes Moonfish, prompting the villain to attack with his quirk. Shoto blocks the tooth blades with an ice wall and warns Katsuki not to rush into the fight. The blades pierce the ice and nearly hit Katsuki, only to be intercepted again by Shoto's ice. Moonfish evades the ice attack and moves fluidly through the treetops. Frustrated, Shoto comments that Moonfish likely has a lot of experience fighting, and they need to be careful. Katsuki wants to counterattack, but Shoto sternly warns him not to start any fires. Shoto analyzes their situation and realizes that retreat isn't possible because of the poison gas surrounding them. He concludes that the villains are trying to drive the students into a corner. Shoto is unable to fight properly as he's carrying Kosei, and he can't use his fire without risking the lives of those in the forest. He does his best to continue defending against Moonfish's onslaught. Katsuki becomes irritated that he's unable to fight back and expresses his desire to attack Moonfish with a big explosion. Shoto advises against it, and Katsuki replies that Shoto needs to freeze the trees should they get set ablaze. Shoto still refutes this and explains the explosion might impair his vision, making him unable to see the fire. Suddenly, Shoto notices Mezzo carrying Izuku towards them while running from the gigantic berserk dark shadow. Mezzo pleads with Shoto and Katsuki and asks them to create light with their quirks. The rampaging dark shadow knocks Moonfish out of the air and crushes him. Shoto prepares to use his fire to weaken Fumikage's quirk, but Katsuki tells him to wait until Dark Shadow finishes Moonfish off. As soon as Dark Shadow defeats Moonfish, Shoto and Katsuki use their quirks to create light and free Fumikage from Dark Shadow's control. Shoto admits he's surprised Fumikage's Dark Shadow was able to defeat Moonfish so easily after barely being able to defend against the villain himself. Shoto, Izuku, Mezzo, and Fumikage decide they need to protect Katsuki at all costs. They form the Bakugo escort team and decide to take a shortcut through the forest to get him back to the facility. Katsuki claims he doesn't need protection, but Shoto tells him they'll surround him for the time being. While on their way to the base camp, the group happens upon Ochako and Tsuyu fighting with Himiko Toga. Himiko retreats and Izuku asks them to join their group. The girls question why Katsuki isn't with them, forcing the group to realize that Katsuki's missing. Mr. Compress appears and reveals that he took him with his magic. Izuku demands the villain return Katsuki, and Shoto agrees while attacking with a wave of ice. Mr. Compress easily evades by jumping through the treetops, and says that the League of Villains wish to show him more options than the fanatical world of heroism he's drowning in. Mezzo points out that Fumikage is missing as well, and Shoto mulls over the fact that the villain was able to snatch two of his strongest classmates without a sound. Angry, Shoto replies to Mr. Compress's monologuing by telling him not to underestimate the students. Mr. Compress explains he took Fumikage because of how easily and violently he defeated Moonfish. Shoto hands Kosei off to Ochako and attempts to freeze Mr. Compress with a massive ice wave. He's surprised when Mr. Compress evades him again and says that the villains are going to take their friends. Izuku says they can't, and Shoto agrees to chase after Mr. Compress in order to stop them. The Bakugo escort team catch Mr. Compress. Shoto and company chase after the masked villain, but he's too quick for them to catch on foot. Izuku devises a plan to use Ochako and Tsuyu's quirk to propel the boys through the air. Ochako nullifies their gravity, Tsuyu throws them, and Mezzo guides them through the air until they're able to tackle Mr. Compress into the ground. They land directly in front of Dabi, Himiko, and Twice. Dabi launches his flames towards the boys, allowing Mr. Compress to escape. Shoto manages to dodge Dabi's flames, but Izuku and Mezzo don't. In an instant, Twice appears behind Shoto and attacks him, but Shoto blocks the attack with his ice. Shoto continues to hold back Twice until Mezzo reveals that he took the marbles from Mr. Compress. Shoto, Mezzo, and Izuku flee, but they get cut off by the sudden arrival of Kurogiri. Mr. Compress reveals he compressed Shoto's ice to fool the students, and reveals he has the real marbles trapped in his mouth. Yuga shoots his laser from behind a bush and blasts Mr. Compress's face, who drops the marbles out of his mouth. Mezzo is able to save Fumikage, but Dabi grabs the second marble before Shoto can get to it. Shoto watches in horror as Katsuki reverts to his normal form and is forced into Kurogiri's warp gate. The following day, Shoto visits Izuku and his classmates in the hospital. He runs into Eijiro and they agree they can't stay home while their friends remain injured. They both overhear Momo talking to All Might about a tracking device she placed on Anomu. Shoto, along with many students from Class 1A, visit Izuku on the day he wakes up from his injuries. Hideout Raid Arc. Izuku cries and laments his failure because he was unable to rescue Katsuki. Eijiro pleads with him to try and rescue Katsuki from the villains. He reveals that he and Shoto were at the hospital the previous day and overheard Momo talking to All Might and the police. Momo put a tracking device on one of the villains. Shoto and Eijiro ask her to create a second receiver so they can go after Katsuki themselves. Shoto says that while he was a target for the villains to kill, Katsuki was taken without being injured. This doesn't mean the villains won't kill him eventually, which is why Shoto and Eijiro feel the need to go rescue him. Tenya argues that it's a foolish idea, and most of Class A agree it should be left to the pro-heroes. Mezzo points out that he understands Shoto's frustration because Katsuki was stolen right in front of them both. Even so, Mezzo says they shouldn't act on their emotions. The doctor enters the room and excuses Izuku's peers so that he can get checked on. Eijiro tells Izuku he and Shoto plan to move out that night. That night, Shoto and Eijiro wait by the hospital for Momo and Izuku's decision. Momo walks out of the hospital doors with Izuku right behind her. Eijiro asks for Momo's answer, but it's interrupted by Tenya's arrival. He's frustrated that Izuku and Shoto, out of all people, would want to break the rules since they were already pardoned for doing so during the Hosu incident. Izuku tries to calm him down, and Tenya ends up punching his friend, shocking Shoto, Momo, and Eijiro. Tenya explains that he's worried about the class and not just Katsuki. He's worried his friends could end up like his brother, and is hurt that they don't seem to care about his feelings on the matter. Shoto tells Tenya that their plan isn't to attack the villains head-on, and they want to rescue Katsuki without fighting. Momo says she trusts Shoto's judgment, and she's going along with them so she can stop the boys if things go south. Izuku strongly states he must save Katsuki because that's all he can think about. Since the group can't seem to come to an agreement, Tenya decides to join them. Momo asks Tenya what his reason for joining them is, and he replies that he's unconvinced the boys will behave themselves. If there's even a hint of potential combat, Tenya will force them all to retreat immediately. Shoto calls him Watchman Ida, and Momo agrees her role on the team will be similar. They all board a train for Kamino Ward in Yokohama City. Izuku asks if the class knows about their mission, and Shoto reveals that they all disapprove. Shoto makes it clear that they're acting against the wishes of their classmates and asks everyone if they're committed anyway. Eijiro says that he is, and Izuku agrees they can't turn back. The group arrives in Kamagane Prefecture, and Eijiro rushes to find the villains. Momo calms him down and reminds the group that the villains know what they look like. She suggests that they all buy disguises, and so they do. Shoto wears a purple dress suit with a gold chain and a wig that covers his scar. They exit the store, and Shoto asks why Momo couldn't use her quirk to make the disguises instead. Momo replies she doesn't want to ruin the economy, and Eijiro figures the rich girl just wanted to go shopping. Momo begins to lead them to the target area, but they notice a press conference being broadcasted featuring Nezu, Eraserhead, and Vlad King. They notice the crowd around them beginning to turn on not only UA, but Hero Society as a whole. Momo eventually leads them to the spot her receiver is showing. Although the villain hasn't left this hideout in the past day, this doesn't mean Katsuki's there. Izuku starts muttering over a plan to infiltrate the building. During their planning, the group is approached by a few drunk men trying to hit on Momo. Shoto suggests they move to a less populated area. They decide to approach the building from the rear and travel through a narrow alleyway. Shoto and Tenya prop Eijiro and Izuku on their shoulders so they can look into the building with night vision goggles. Eijiro suddenly gets scared, and Shoto asks if the villain saw him. Eijiro passes the goggles to Izuku, who reveals that inside the hideout is a Nomu factory. The students are shocked when they notice Mount Lady and other pro heroes breaking into the hideout. Mount Lady stomps on the building, and the shockwave from the impact knocks Shoto's wig off his head. The students recover and look back into the building to see Best Jeanist, Mount Lady, Tiger, and Gang Orca have subdued all the Nomu. Since the heroes appear to have the situation under control, Shoto and company decide to leave. However, the situation gets completely turned on its head when All For One arrives and attacks the bro heroes. His very presence strikes the students with fear. They desperately hold their breath and hide behind the broken wall, fearing death from the League of Villains' true leader. All For One effortlessly defeats all the pro heroes and warps Katsuki to his location. The other members of the League of Villains are warped there as well. Izuku prepares to make a move, but Tenya grabs him and Shoto to stop them from getting noticed by the villains. All For One appears to notice them, but it was the arrival of All Might that he noticed. All Might and All For One begin their duel. Tomura and the League of Villains are ordered to escape through Kurogiri's warp gate after they recapture Katsuki. The villains surround him and Katsuki fights back to avoid capture. Izuku comes up with a plan to rescue Katsuki without fighting, and the others agree to it. Katsuki knows All Might can't go all out against All For One because his student is nearby. This is causing Katsuki to keep his distance from the villains, which will give the students an opening to rescue him. Izuku, Tenya, and Eijiro use their quirks to break through the wall. Shoto creates a giant ice ramp for them to scale so that they'll be high above the battlefield. All Might keeps All For One from interfering, and Eijiro calls out to Katsuki because they're friends. Katsuki listens and uses a large explosion to propel himself into the air, and then uses another one to reach Eijiro, successfully completing the rescue mission. Shoto tells Momo the villain's attention is on the others. They use the opening to escape and leave the alleyway together. They successfully escape, and Shoto calls Izuku on the phone. He informs Izuku that they're back on one of Kamino's main streets and confirms that Izuku and the others got away with Katsuki. Shoto and Momo move to regroup with them, and they hear the loud cheers for All Might during the climax of his battle with All For One. After All Might defeats All For One and the Kamino incident concludes, Shoto and Momo regroup with the others and take Katsuki to the police. Less than half a day later, they all go their separate ways. Shoto reads the news about All Might's retirement on his phone as he heads home. Fuyumi welcomes him home and tells him that she was worried. Shoto apologizes, and then she tells him that their father is going crazy inside his training room. Shoto goes to see for himself, realizing that Endeavor is the #1 hero now that All Might can't fight anymore. Shoto peeks into the training room to see his father lamenting the events that transpired. As Shoto looks on, Endeavor lights more than half the room on fire, and he says he refuses to accept being #1 this way. Provisional Hero License Exam Arc. All of Class 1A gets permission from their guardians to move on campus into UA High's Heights Alliance dormitory. On the day everyone moves in, Aizawa tells his students that they'll resume training to get their provisional hero licenses. He also tells the entire class that Shoto, Momo, Izuku, Eijiro, and Tenya went to save Katsuki from the villains. Everyone in the class would have been expelled as a result of this if it weren't for All Might's retirement. The students get a tour of their new living quarters and are given the day to move in. The girls in the class decide to hold a room presentation contest called the Room King. Many of Shoto's fellow boys are embarrassed by the presentation, but Shoto remains aloof and expresses how tired he is. Mezzo's room appears to be completely empty, and Shoto tells Mezzo he never realized his friend was a minimalist. When the class reaches Shoto's room, he's quick to open his door because he's tired and wants to get it over with. Much to everyone's surprise, Shoto has a Japanese-style room that looks very different from everyone else's choice and style. He explains that he has tatami flooring at home, so he can't relax without having it in his living space. Denki and Mineta ask how Shoto managed to do such an intense remodel in just one day. Shoto surprises everyone again by simply replying that he worked hard. After the contest ends, Shoto asks if he could finally go to bed. Tenya tells him to make sure he brushes his teeth, and then he walks off. Ochako stops Shoto and brings him outside along with Tenya, Izuku, Momo, and Eijiro. Tsuyu waits for them outside the building and tells them that the trust between the class has been shaken because of all their actions during the Kamino incident. She explains that she thought she had stopped her peers from attempting to break the rules back at the hospital and was shocked to learn from their teacher that her friends had forgone her warning. Ochako explains that many students in the class feel uneasy about what happened and use the Room King competition to have fun. Shoto and everyone else apologizes to Tsuyu for making her sad, and they all resolve to bring Class 1A closer again. In the days remaining before the upcoming Provisional Hero License exam, Class 1A must train to hone their super moves. Ectoplasm, Midnight, and Cementos take the students to Gym Gamma to continue their quirk training so they can develop their own special techniques to use in the licensing exam. Shoto hones his skills during the super move training by practicing the simultaneous release of the left and right side of his quirk. He also upgrades his costume with improved snow boots and 2 new wrist guards made to help him regulate the temperatures of his quirk. Class 1A trains for 10 days until the day of the provisional licensing exam arrives. Class 1A arrives at National Dagobah Stadium, and Eijiro tries to start a Plus Ultra chant after Aizawa's words of encouragement. A familiar Shiketsu student crashes the chant and yells Plus Ultra himself. Shoto notices him right away but doesn't fully recognize him. After Inasa leaves, Aizawa reveals to the class that he was the top student among those admitted with recommendations. Izuku is surprised to hear that Inasa's skills are supposedly above Shoto's. Miss Joke's class from Ketsubutsu Academy High School greets Class 1A as well. Tatami and Nakagame compliments Shoto on looking cool at the sports festival and asks for his autograph. Aizawa tells his students to change into their costumes and head to orientation. Yokumiro Mera explains the rules of the first phase of the exam to the thousands of students in attendance. Students must eliminate 2 people by hitting their targets with orange projectiles in order to move on to the second phase. Shoto is surprised when the orientation room opens up and the entire arena is exposed. Each class of students moves as a group to different areas of the arena. Izuku suggests Class 1A stick together because all of their quirks were exposed during the sports festival. However, Shoto is uncomfortable using his quirk in a big group and decides to go off on his own. Shoto goes to the factory-like district of the arena and feels tremors set off by Ketsubutsu Academy's Yo Shindo. He hides by himself and tries to wait it out until he can take advantage of big teams fighting one another. However, the exam's been moving quickly, and over half of the remaining slots have been filled by students who have already passed. Shoto realizes he can't just wait around and moves from his hiding spot. He's immediately confronted by 10 students from Seijin High School. The ninja-clad students are impressed by Shoto's reaction as the UA standout scorches their first projectile. They call him crazy for acting alone and ambush him with a barrage using the orange balls. Shoto protects himself with an ice shield and then effortlessly freezes his opponents in place. The leader of the pack uses a quirk that enlarges objects and throws a giant metal nut at Shoto. The UA student blocks it with his ice defense, but it crumbles under the weight of many enlarged nuts, bolts, and nails. Shoto decides not to go all out in case there are other people nearby. He tries to melt a giant incoming projectile using his fire, but he's forced to dodge at the last moment. The lead Seijin student explains his tools are made from a material resistant to extreme temperatures. He frees his fellow students from the ice and tells Shoto that acting alone shows that he's too overconfident. Shoto attacks with his flames, but 2 of the students counter using their water quirks. The students break through Shoto's ice defense using physical objects. He flees the area after creating smokescreen and surmises that the Hero Public Safety Commission designed the many areas of the arena to be used to the students' advantage. Shoto pierces an oil tank using his ice and leads his opponent into a trap using a fake fire signal. He defeats the Seijin students by detonating the tank by blasting its puncture with his fire. Shoto freezes them all in place before eliminating 2 of them to pass the first phase of the exam. He walks away and thinks about practicing using both sides of his quirk because it slows him down. The targets on his body light up and tell him to head to the anteroom until the first phase concludes. Shoto arrives in the anteroom and sits down before meeting Inasa's cold glare from across the room. He wonders why he didn't meet Inasa at the entrance exams since he applied through recommendations. Momo, Suyu, Mezo, and Kyoka arrive in the anteroom just as Shoto begins to worry about his classmates. He asks how they got separated if they were all working together, and Momo explains the tremors from earlier were used to split Class 1A up. Izuku, Hanta, Ochako, Katsuki, Denki, and Eijiro join them later on to make 11 members of Class 1A that have passed. The remaining students make an inspirational comeback in the climax of the first test to take the last 9 spots for the first phase. During the intermission between phases, Shiketsu students confront Katsuki to apologize for Seiji Shishikura's behavior. They wish to maintain a good relationship with UA, but Shoto questions that because of Inasa's earlier glare. He confronts Inasa, and the first-year Shiketsu students reveal that he hates both Endeavor and his son. He says that Shoto has changed since the entrance exams, but his eyes are still the same as his father's. For the second and final phase of the licensing exam, students are tasked with conducting rescue operations. The arena is destroyed to simulate a villain attack, and students are scored based on the rescue tactics. Class 1A sticks together initially, but Shoto goes with Tsuyu and Toru to rescue civilians from HUC by the river. Shoto's group takes notice when the test reaches its climactic point when Gang Orca and his group of villains invades the arena. Students must now juggle rescue operations on top of suppressing the villainous threat. Tsuyu says that although there are still many more people to rescue, the group can't simply ignore the villains attacking the rescue station. Shoto rushes to the front lines and keeps Gang Orca away from the rescue station using a freezing attack. This gives his peers an opening to evacuate injured civilians away from the villain attack. Shoto freezes Gang Orca's sidekicks and keeps up an ice barrage that the makeshift villain counters using ultrasonic waves. He commends the number 10 hero's ability and then notices Inasa arriving on the battlefield and attacking using his wind. Shoto is annoyed by Inasa's presence because he sees him as a distraction. He tells his arch-rival to help with the rescue efforts instead. Inasa refuses and tries to blow away the civilians with a whirlwind at the same time as Shoto's flame blast. They cause each other to miss, and this sparks an argument between them. Inasa claims the son of Endeavor is trying to hog the glory just like his father would. This irritates Shoto, and he leaves himself open to getting shot by one of the sidekick's cement guns while trying to argue his father has nothing to do with him. Inasa says that he knew Shoto was Endeavor's son at the entrance exam because they both have the same cold, angry, and hate-filled eyes. Shoto refutes this and writes Inasa off as an Endeavor hater. He tries to focus and foolishly uses his flames at the same time as Inasa's wind again. Only this time, they endanger Yo Shindo, who's injured nearby. Izuku pulls Yo away from the flames and yells at Shoto to think about his reckless actions. Shoto finally recalls Inasa from the entrance exam and realizes he never really looked at him during that time. Shoto's bad attitude was a result of him trying to reject his father, and now his negative actions are catching up to him. Shoto realizes this situation is a chain reaction from his past actions and knows he can no longer try to bury his feelings about his father. Gang Orca approaches Shoto to distract Inasa before blasting him with hypersonic waves. Shoto tries to help, but the villain grabs him by the neck and reminds him that you reap what you sow before blasting him with more hypersonic waves. Gang Orca drops Shoto's paralyzed body to the ground as the student mulls over his mistakes and decides he has to make up for them. Shoto and Inasa both know that as long as they remain incompatible, they'll never defeat a top pro hero. The former hopes that the latter feels the same as him and ignites his flame so that Inasa's wind can scoop them up. Shoto adds the heat from his fire to Inasa's whirlwind to create a spiraling flame prison that traps Gang Orca. Gang Orca's sidekicks try to shoot Shoto to stop his flames from drying their captain out. Shoto creates ice to block himself by managing to dual-wield both his elements since his body can't move regardless. Gang Orca admits the duo managed to pull out an impressive unison move, but he adds that they need to have a backup plan for when a villain doesn't concede. He uses a water bottle to rehydrate himself, and then breaks out of the hot wind prison. Shoto and Inasa are on the edge of defeat, but Izuku comes to the rescue before Gang Orca finishes them off. Shoto comments that Izuku is always there to help, and then the test suddenly ends. Students change back into their uniforms and gather around Yokumiru Mera. He presents a list of names of the students who passed the exam and explains students were graded on a demerit system based on scoring how few mistakes were made. Shoto doesn't find his name on the list and isn't surprised to learn that he failed the exam. Inasa approaches Shoto and apologizes for being petty and causing him to fail. Shoto replies that his failure was a result of his own actions. His peers are shocked to learn that he wasn't able to gain a provisional license. Mineta claims the hierarchy of Class 1A is collapsing, and Tenya gets him away from Shoto. Yokumiro addresses the students who failed the exam and reveals there's a 3-month remedial course for them to take in order to get their licenses. Shoto is pleasantly surprised by this revelation and tells his friends that he'll catch up with them soon. Shie Hasaikai Arc. Summer break ends and UA students attend the orientation for the second term. On their way to orientation, Class 1A gets heckled by Nato Monoma. Nato reveals that all of Class 1B passed the exam. Shoto was one of the 2 people to fail. Ashamed, Shoto apologizes to his classmates and Eijiro assures him it's not a competition. Principal Nezu leads orientation and mentions hero work studies during his speech. This gains Shoto's interest because he's unsure of what the principal is talking about. Aizawa explains the hero work studies the first homeroom class. He introduces Class 1A to the Big 3 so they can explain how the work studies differ from the hero internships. Nejire Hado gets easily distracted and asks Shoto about his scar. Do you want to know about my scars? Sorry, I just had to. He doesn't even get to answer before she moves on to asking other students random questions about themselves. Miria Togata goes last and suggests that Class 1A fight him to get the best idea about the program. Shoto sits out of the fight and watches Mirio annihilate his classmates one after another. Aizawa comments that Mirio is closer to being the number 1 hero than even Shoto's father. Shoto is shocked that Mirio is stronger than pro heroes, and Aizawa asks why he's not fighting. Shoto says he failed to get his hero license, and Aizawa is surprised by how much Shoto's attitude has changed. Mirio defeats all of Class 1A, save for Shoto and Katsuki, and explains that experience made him powerful. The experience he gained from the hero work studies transformed him from a failure into UA's top student. Shoto's classmates are inspired by the speech, but he realizes that he's going to fall behind everyone. Shoto and Katsuki attend provisional license training that weekend. The training is physical enough to give Shoto and Katsuki injuries to showcase to their peers the next class. The girls are heartbroken that Shoto's pretty boy face has been ruined. During lunch a few days later, Shoto and Tenya notice Izuku is stressed out from his new job. Tenya reminds Izuku that he can always talk to his friends, and the latter cheers up. Izuku wipes away his tears and claims heroes don't cry. Shoto argues the opposite and offers his friend some of his soba. Izuku, Eijiro, Tsuyu, and Ochako are involved in a villain incident on their jobs with different hero offices. Shoto and the others greet them at Heights Alliance when they all return from the hospital. He gets a reminder on his phone and apologizes to his classmates before going to bed. Shoto and Katsuki both go to bed early because they have provisional license training in the morning. Remedial Course Arc. Shoto and Katsuki leave for training first thing in the morning. They're greeted by All Might and Present Mic, who claim they're late. Endeavor messaged his son the night before to announce that he'll be at the training. Shoto hopes that his father doesn't run into All Might. Inasa and Keimi arrive at the training facility at the same time, and Shoto isn't exactly happy to see them. Gang Orca and Yokumiru confront the remedial course group to tell them it's time to step it up. The students change into their hero costume and walk towards the main gym. Inasa walks with Shoto and asks him about his favorite food. Shoto likes cold soba, but Inasa likes the warm kind. Inasa tries to seek out similarities between them, but Shoto believes it would be best not to force themselves to be friends. All 11 students arrive in the gymnasium, and Endeavor yells at Shoto from the stands that he doesn't belong in the remedial course. Gang Orca confronts the students and belittles them for failing the original licensing exam. He yells at Shoto and questions how he could ever save people. Shoto gives a literal response, and then the number 10 hero comically knocks him across the room. Gang Orca says Shoto, Katsuki, and Inasa are plenty strong in a fight, but they all lack the true heart of a hero. Heroes must always save others, even when they're being rejected. The students are assigned a trial where they must save troubled students using their hearts. Children with powerful quirks from Masagaki Primary School fill the gym. Some of the students grab the capsules on Shoto's belt and call them peepees, giving Shoto the nickname 5 Peepee Man. Shoto tries to explain they're the first aid treatment, but the kids find that boring and jump on him. Katsuki gets his grenadier bracers stolen by the kids, and Shoto worries they're too dangerous to be in children's hands. Shoto surmises that his team needs to be sensitive to the children to try and win them over. Katsuki tries to intimidate the children's leader to make them fall in line, but that backfires. Inasa tries to be kind to the children, but they just make fun of him. Shoto tries to tell the students what kind of person he is so they'll listen to him, but they just find him boring. He apologizes, and Inasa tells them that it's okay because he tried his best. Keimi suggests that they try to win the kids over by showing off their quirks. The children activate their quirks in response and announce that they believe their generation is stronger than the previous one. Katsuki leads the team and tells the trouble brats to bring it on. The kids attack using their potent quirks. The team simply endures their attacks before repelling them. Katsuki is surprised kids would attack unprovoked, and Shoto replies that they likely believe the hero prospects don't mind what's done to them. The students are surprised that the heroes in training aren't afraid of their quirks. They get aggressive again, but Keimi creates an illusion of Shoto to calm the little girls down. Katsuki finds the illusion hilarious, but Shoto doesn't see what's so funny about it. Inasa follows up by lifting kids into the air with his quirk, and then Shoto works together with him to create a beautiful slide made of ice. Shoto says he used all their splendid quirks as a template to make the slide because he can't form special shapes on his own with his ice. The kids are taken aback and amazed by what the heroes in training can do with their quirks. He tells them to line up so Inasa can lift them to the top of the slide. Shoto, Inasa, and Katsuki plan to win over the kids by using their quirks to make them look cool. However, they understood they shouldn't make the students feel bad for defeating them. Instead, they should try to broaden their perspectives. By deepening their interactions without breaking the children's spirits, the heroes in training win the students over. Inasa even promises to build a roller coaster, but Shoto doesn't believe it's even possible. Shoto warms up the children using his fire and smiles as his father and All Might look on and comment that quirks were made to help others. Having accomplished their mission, the heroes in training clean up the gym with the kids. The team bids farewell to the precious brats and officially pass the provisional training course. They change back into their student uniforms and exit the gym. Inasa says that his quirk is actually very compatible with Shoto's, and the latter agrees. Endeavor approaches Shoto outside and says it's been a long time since they last saw each other. He reaches out to his son and says he's changed a lot, but Shoto smacks his hand away. Despite Shoto's rejection, Endeavor says he's proud of his son, and he wants to become a hero his son can be proud of as well. Shoto awkwardly tells Endeavor to do what he wants. Endeavor leaves, and Shoto looks on with a smile. UA School Festival Arc. UA's school festival approaches, and Class 1A gets instructed to prepare any kind of themed spectacle to be presented. The class tries to vote on one theme, but isn't even able to narrow down a long list of possible presentations. The students talk about it again later at the dorms. Tanya decides the class should focus on something that helps the crowd enjoy themselves. Shoto agrees with Mina that they should try to get the crowd to dance and have fun. He looks up a video of a musical performance and suggests the class emulate that. Everyone can't believe this party-style idea came from their aloof classmate. Shoto credits his idea to his experience with the provisional licensing training. The class decides on a musical performance for the festival. Class 1A starts planning for the festival 1 month in advance. Jiro is put front and center, and the class wants Katsuki to back her up on the drums. He refuses because students from other departments don't deserve to be pleased. Shoto tells him not to belittle the class if he refuses to participate. Katsuki reveals that he'll participate by killing the other classes with his sound. Mina explains to Shoto and the others that they need staging to create an entertaining atmosphere. She plans to create snowflakes by having Eijiro use his hardened body to chip away at Shoto's ice. They're assigned to the staging team with Hanta, Koji, and Yuga. During the following days, like their band team and dance teammates, the stage team practiced for the musical to make the special effects the most spectacular in order to cheer up the audience. The day of the festival arrives, and the musical performance is a complete success. During the event, Shoto collaborates with Sero to create garlands of ice, and with Eijiro to create ice dust. After their performance, Shoto enjoys the rest of the festival together with Tenya Ida, Fumikage Tokoyami, and Koji Koda. Pro Hero Arc. Following Endeavor's rise in rank to number 1 hero, he's attacked by an intelligent Nomu called Hood. The incident is broadcasted on television as the powerful monster destroys the city. Endeavor and Hawks fight it back, but it counters all of the number 1 hero's flame moves. Hood manages to injure Endeavor's head and knocks him down. Seemingly defeated, Endeavor lies beneath the beast as Shoto watches in shock. Endeavor gets back up and continues fighting. Shoto's classmates and Aizawa check up on him while he watches his father lose ground in the battle. He's surprised to hear as a citizen stands up for Endeavor to the media. He tells the reporters to raise up Endeavor as the hero who's giving his all for them. Endeavor makes a last stand against the violent monster, and Shoto passionately yells that he's watching his father. He watches nervously as Endeavor burns High-End Hood to death with a plus ultra prominence burn. Endeavor stands up victorious, and Shoto collapses to his knees. Relieved his father is still alive. Shoto's worries quickly return when Dabi appears and surrounds Endeavor and Hawks with blue flames. Shoto recognizes Dabi from the training camp attack. Dabi confronts Endeavor but retreats after Mirko arrives. Shoto gets permission to leave school grounds and returns home. He reunites with his siblings Fuyumi and Natsuo over lunch. Their father enters the house and Shoto makes a clever remark about his new scar. Fuyumi is upset that neither of her brothers greet him properly. Natsuo storms out after claiming that their dad will never change and he doesn't deserve forgiveness. Shoto says he's never seen Natsuo so emotional. The three of them listen to the television broadcast for the public opinion on Endeavor. Shoto says Endeavor the hero is amazing, but he still hasn't forgiven his father. He's willing to see how his father can change because Shoto knows how one influence can change someone. Joint Training Arc. Class 1A and Class 1B engage in their first joint training exercise together. Everyone changes into their hero costumes and meets at Ground Beta. Eraserhead and Vlad King explain that Class 1A and Class 1B will battle over 5 sets with randomized teams of 4. The teams are to treat each other as villains and can attain victory by capturing 4 of the opposing team's members. Hitoshi Shinso joins the exercise and some students compare his attitude to early Roki. The students draw lots and Shoto is on a team with Tenya, Mezzo, and Mashirao. They're to face off with a team comprised of Tetsu, Juzo, Sen, and Pony. Shoto's team is up next for the 3rd battle, and the match begins, and Shoto comments that they must want to turn this battle into a head-on-head fight. Shoto's team splits up, and Mezzo gets their enemy's location. Shoto freezes the area with a giant ice attack, which doesn't impede his team's vision, which shows improvement. Tenya goes in to arrest the enemy, but Juzo counterattacks by softening all the ice with his quirk. He tells Shoto that he should have attacked with his flames instead. Pony uses her horns to send Mezzo away and isolate Shoto. Her horns boost Tetsu through Shoto's ice, and the Iron Fighter takes him on alone. Tetsu takes Shoto and throws him to the ground while telling him he stands no chance in a hand-to-hand fight. Shoto tries to fight back with an ice wave, but Tetsu breaks through it with his steel fist. Shoto recovers and tries a wall of flames instead. He tells Mezzo to go after Pony and hopes Tetsu retreats. Tetsu walks through the flames and reveals that half cold, half hot won't work on his iron body. Tetsu grabs Shoto and hits him, planning to beat him unconscious. Memories of Enji training Shoto as a child fill Shoto's head. Enji told Shoto that within him is the greatest power in the world. Shoto raises his hand to protect himself and prepares to go beyond. Since his attacks haven't worked thus far, Shoto turns up the heat and draws out the full potential of his flames. Tetsu backs off as Shoto warns him to, or else he'll melt. Shoto burns through his limits to achieve his dreams of becoming a great hero. He stands before Tetsu clad in flames powerful enough to set the entire training field ablaze. Tetsu doesn't back down from Shoto's endeavor level flames. He engages in a battle of endurance and Shoto warns him of the possible repercussions. Tetsu claims heroes must be ready to put their lives on the line, and Shoto replies he's too loud. The flames are so hot that it's raising Shoto's body temperature and makes him dizzy. He needs to get some distance so he can cool himself with ice. Shoto prepares to counterattack, but Juzo interrupts and sinks Shoto into the ground. A softened pipe lands on Shoto's head, and he falls unconscious. Tenya saves him from being captured, but both are caught in a last-ditch effort from Tetsu and Juzo. The match ends in a draw, and Shoto is taken to the infirmary. He abruptly wakes up next to Tenya. Tetsu is leaving the room, and he commends Shoto's flames for defeating him. Tenya apologizes for not being fast enough to save Shoto, but Shoto vaguely remembers Tenya saving him and argues that he was the one that was too slow. Shoto knows that he's gotten into a bad habit of favoring his ice and has become predictable. He remembers watching All Might and says he needs to become a more reliable hero. Juzo opens the curtains next to them and admits that flames and Recipro are hard for him to deal with. He asks for a rematch sometime, and the two boys from Class 1A agree. At the dorm, Shoto approaches Izuku, stating he was looking for him and asks if he also has two quirks, and if he was still hiding his power when he asked Shoto to come at him with all he had. To which Izuku hurriedly replies that the black tendrils might be an extension of his original quirk, and he wasn't holding back against him. Shoto believes his explanation, and Izuku compliments Shoto on how much his flame was able to generate in the battle, but Shoto denies this, saying that he hasn't changed at all compared to Izuku. It's revealed that he requested that his father Endeavor teach him about one of his fire moves, Flash Fire. Meta Liberation Army Arc. During an early morning in December, Shoto and Katsuki left for the final lesson of the provisional license course. He's seen eager to obtain his license when Gang Orca and his sidekicks prepare to carry out the final lesson for those present, stating that if they succeed, they can obtain their licenses. Eventually they pass, so yeah, they got their licenses. While out on the streets with All Might, chaos breaks out in the city because of villains stealing from the public. Shoto and Katsuki were eager to intervene, while All Might tells them to analyze the situation before leaping into action. The students tell him they can handle it. All Might tries to dissuade them since they've only just earned the provisional licenses, but they pay no heed and attack the villains nonetheless, making use of their new privilege. Shoto opens with his signature giant ice ball attack, but the Seltzer villain can manipulate carbonation inside water. The villains break out of the icy prison, but Katsuki acts quickly and knocks most of them out. The leader nearly turns the tables on Katsuki with water gauntlets. Before things spiral out of control, Shoto puts down the criminal with his ultimate move, Flash Freeze Heat Wave. Katsuki asks if that's the same move he used against Izuku in the sports festival, and Shoto confirms it was a watered-down version. All Might returns to the scenes with Pro Hero Slide and Go. They're impressed with the results as the boys defeated the villains and took back the stolen items. All Might tells his young champions that he's proud of them, garnering warm gratitude from Shoto. Endeavor Agency Arc. 30 minutes later, Shoto and Katsuki are being interviewed by the press for the third time back at Heights Alliance. Shoto appears to have accepted Katsuki as a friend and says that they'll get along great. The interview ends an hour later, and the two go about their day along with the rest of the students. The next day in class, Mount Lady visits as a guest lecturer to organize a practical lesson about confronting the media by conducting practice interviews. Shoto goes first and is completely clueless about Mount Lady's questions and figurative language, only being able to be his serious self. When asked about his super moves, Shoto demonstrates his heaven-piercing ice wall and mentions his Flash Freeze Heat Wave. Toru chimes in with Flash Fire Fist, but Shoto says that's Endeavor's technique, not his. He says his current abilities still don't even come close to his father's. Mount Lady tells Shoto that he should smile and that it would make the girls drop dead, to which Shoto gets worried that his smile would kill them. At the Christmas party, Shoto can be seen sitting with Ojiro and Tokoyami. After the party, Shoto approaches Izuku and Katsuki and invites them to join him as interns of Endeavor. Sometime after, Shoto, Izuku, and Katsuki meet with Endeavor atop an overpass in the city. Endeavor expresses his discontentment that he isn't able to intern Shoto alone. Shoto tells him that he's already accepted them, and therefore to stop complaining, prompting a Shoto from Endeavor. Katsuki tells Endeavor that ever since the training course, he saw the pro hero was a jerk, and that he would put up with him since he was the #1 hero. And Endeavor tells Shoto he was supposed to choose his friends wisely. The three follow Endeavor as he walks through the city. Suddenly, Endeavor jumps off the overpass and flies towards the source of his scream, telling the students to stand back and watch. As he flew, Endeavor looks behind him to see the three students falling right behind him. As the three students chased him, Endeavor suddenly gains a burst of speed, rocketing far ahead of them. Shoto recognizes this as Endeavor's flash fire technique. Endeavor stops Star Servant's enlightened fallen king and chases after him. Star Servant leads Endeavor through an alley where there were 3 minions ready to ambush Endeavor. Shoto uses his ice while Izuku and Katsuki use their superior speed to reach the minions in order to prevent them from ambushing Endeavor, but Hawk swoops in and takes all 3 minions out himself. Shoto arrives as Izuku and Katsuki recover, and Hawks playfully asks him if he thought Endeavor was in any trouble just now. As the police take Star Servant and his minions away, Shoto watches Endeavor talk with the police. Meanwhile, Hawks makes casual conversation with Izuku and Katsuki before Endeavor asks him what he was doing here. Hawks deflects the question and promotes the Paranormal Liberation Front's book, telling him how popular it is and how relevant it is to today's society. During the following days, the 3 students try to surpass Endeavor's test, but the veteran hero always manages to catch the villains before them. Endeavor doesn't hesitate to criticize them, telling them what facets they need to improve. During a break, Endeavor tells Shoto that in terms of the aim of focusing his powers, he's already halfway there, as he's already mastered shaping his ice. All that was left was for him to do the same with his left side. A week later, Endeavor brings Shoto, Izuku, and Katsuki over to his house for dinner per his daughter's suggestion. Dinner starts well with Izuku praising the food Fuyumi cooked, but ended up being quite awkward due to the complicated relationship between Endeavor and his children, and specifically due to Natsuo's resentment towards his father, and after he finishes, he quickly leaves, unable to sit near his father. While Fuyumi and Shoto are alone, Fuyumi admits to Shoto that despite still harboring some feelings of resentment towards Endeavor too, she can look past it if it can give them a chance to be a normal family. Shoto tells Fuyumi that he's always seen the burn scar on his left side as something their father gave them, as it was his abuse of their mother Rei that ultimately pushed her to hurt him. Shoto explains that he can't forgive him so easily for what he did to her, but acknowledges that his mother's trying to move on from it, so he isn't sure what to think of him. Izuku and Katsuki overhear them, and Izuku tells Shoto that he feels Shoto is preparing himself to forgive Endeavor, as he feels that if he truly hated him, he would have told him so by now. Izuku voices his belief that due to Shoto being a very kind person, he's waiting for the right moment to do it. Fuyumi and Shoto tell Izuku and Katsuki about their older brother Toya, and how close he was to Natsuo, to the point he blames Endeavor for Toya's death. Fuyumi says that an incident occurred after their mother was hospitalized, which only made things worse. Although family relationships have improved a lot, there are still many wounds to heal. Endeavor then comes in and tells the 3 of them that he'll be taking them to UA High School. As the 3 of them thank Fuyumi for the meal, Fuyumi thanks Izuku for being Shoto's friend. While Endeavor's chauffeur drives them back to UA, Endeavor tells the boys that they will have to keep going to his agency to continue the training on weekdays and weekends if their schedule allows. Just then, a villain appears in the middle of the road, holding Natsuo as a hostage, and calls out Endeavor to come face him. Endeavor leaps out of the car to save his son. The villain, introducing himself as Ending, is obsessed with Endeavor and wants the hero to kill him. Ending takes a step back when he sees the interns, giving Endeavor an opportunity to attack the off-balance villain. However, when he sees Natsuo being held in front of Ending, Endeavor slows down, not wanting to endanger him, and allowing the 3 students past him in order to rescue Natsuo and defeat the villain. Disappointed, Ending threats to increase the death toll if the flame hero doesn't kill him, sending several incoming cars into the air. He also puts Natsuo directly in the path of a car, but Katsuki rescues him in an instant. Ending attacks Shoto with his white line quirk, but Shoto destroys the lines by focusing his fire into a shield in front of him. After Izuku had caught the cars that Ending had flung into the air and saved the citizens, Shoto finishes Ending off with a fire-powered punch and then freezes him in place to capture him. As Natsuo thanks the 3 of them, he asks Katsuki what his hero name is. When Izuku questions if it's just Bakugo, Katsuki denies it, revealing that he's picked a hero name for himself. Izuku and Shoto ask what it is, but Katsuki refuses, instead wanting to tell someone else first. Paranormal Liberation War Arc. The months go by until they arrive at the end of March. Thanks to the police investigation and its spy Hawks, the Hero Public Safety Commission had uncovered the plans of the Paranormal Liberation Front and its allies. With this information, the commission organized a large force of pro-heroes to take down the villain organization. A team of heroes made up of mainly students and led by Burnin will be in charge of evacuating the residents of a city near the hospital and taking them to a safe place. Shoto, with an upgraded costume, is part of this team. When everything is ready, Endeavor orders the start of the operation, and Burnin signals the students to start evacuating the citizens. As Shoto and the students evacuate the citizens, Endeavor and his squad arrive at the secret laboratories below the hospital after defeating all of the Nomus that Dr. Garaki releases in an attempt to stop them. However, when the heroes think they've already won, at that moment Tomura Shigaraki wakes up. Shoto reaches the battle between Shigaraki and the heroes just in time to save Aizawa from Tomura, knocking the villain away with a pillar of ice. He then goes over to Endeavor, who by now is severely overheated, and uses his ice to cool him off. Endeavor orders Shoto to apply first aid to the injured heroes while Deku clashes with Tomura in the air. Not long after, however, Gigantomachia finally makes it to the battlefield, with Shoto looking on in panic. While Makia asks for orders from an unresponsive Shigaraki, Dabi takes the opportunity to greet Shoto and Endeavor from atop Makia's back. When Endeavor calls out Dabi's name, Dabi uses a liquid to remove the black dye from his hair and officially greets them by his true name, Toya. Shoto and Endeavor are stunned into silence at the revelation and can only look on dumbfounded while Toya expresses his disappointment that neither of them could recognize him despite being family. They look on and listen, completely mute, as Toya tells them that he's been closely watching Endeavor from the shadows, with his original plan of action being to wait until Shoto had grown into a hero that Endeavor always wanted him to be, and then kill him. But after Endeavor became the top hero in Japan, he devised an alternative plan. To build up Endeavor's public image by sending Hood, Star Servant, and Ending to him as adversaries to defeat, and then destroying that public image by exposing his abusive past. He then invites his father to dance with him in the hell they've created. Shoto grimaces with horror as his older brother sadistically smiles and jumps down, thanking Endeavor for staying strong while preparing to deliver the final blow. Seeing that his father is too shocked to move, he pleads with Endeavor to protect them and to worry about the rest later while tears begin to form in his eyes. Before Dabi can unleash his prominence burn, he's trapped by wires falling from the sky, revealed to have come from Best Jeanist. Shoto begs Dabi to stop. As Shoto battles his brother, he tells Dabi that one of the villains he sent to Endeavor almost killed Natsuo, to whom Dabi claimed to have cried to every day. Dabi merely says that it was a shame Natsuo didn't die because then Endeavor would have suffered more. An incredulous Shoto asks Dabi if he's insane, to which Dabi replies that he doesn't have feelings anymore. Dabi then starts to push Shoto back, excited to finally kill Shoto. Shoto notes that Dabi is burning himself in the process, but Dabi assures him that he's happy as he gets to watch his father's face as his so-called failure kills his masterpiece. At that point, Deku uses Black Whip from his mouth to separate Dabi from Shoto before Dabi can burn him anymore. Dabi tells Deku not to interfere in family affairs, but Deku insists that he will because Shoto's his dear friend and Endeavor is his mentor. Just as Gigantomachia begins breaking out of Best Jeanist's bondage, Endeavor uses the last of his strength to deliver a blow to Gigantomachia's jaw and knock Gigantomachia out. With Endeavor unconscious, Dabi can no longer find any reason to continue fighting Shoto as he wants his father to watch as he kills his youngest brother. Before Shoto can unleash another attack, Dabi apologizes for the change of plans before blasting Shoto with a jet burn and leaving him to fall from the sky. Shoto manages to land safely and tries to chase down Shigaraki and his brother, who were retreating on a pack of near Hyens. Unfortunately, they managed to retreat successfully, leaving Shoto and the others to deal with the aftermath of the battle. 2 days after the war, Shoto was recovering from his injuries at Central Hospital. The rest of his family then comes to visit Shoto. The four of them go up to Enji's room. When Shoto opens the door, he's shocked to see his father crying and closes the door to let the others know that Enji is sobbing. Shoto stands silently as Enji and Rei talk about the past, how their family fell apart, and how Toya became the villain Dabi. After each family member takes responsibility for Toya, Rei claims that Shoto has suffered much more than any of them, has called her mom despite having every reason to hate her, and has made new friends at UA High, stating that he's the family's hero. Shoto explains to his father that he'd initially planned to fight Toya alone, but after talking with Rei, he realized this wasn't his fight alone. He then extends his hand to his father, who's sobbing uncontrollably, offering to help him once he finishes grieving so they can all go together to stop Toya. Hawks and Best Jeanist enter the room, revealing that they were eavesdropping on their conversation. Hawks puts his elbow on Shoto's shoulder and asks him if Endeavor was the one who gave Shoto his burn, though Shoto is put off by the hero being so close. Rei corrects Hawks and says she was responsible for his burn. Hawks respects Shoto for choosing to not abandon his parents despite the trauma they caused him, and calls him a class act, much to Shoto's confusion. The heroes both offer up their assistance to help the Todorokis deal with Dabi. Tartarus Escapees Arc. Returning back to Heights Alliance after recovering from their injuries, Shoto, along with the rest of Class 1A, each receive a letter from Izuku telling the truth about his quirk and how Izuku has left UA due to being All for One's target. A few days later, Class 1A discusses Izuku's letter, and they come to the conclusion that Izuku is currently working with Endeavor, Hawks, and Best Jeanist. When asked if they could confirm Izuku's location and safety with the top 3 heroes, Shoto, Fumikage, and Katsuki all confirm their respective mentors aren't answering their phones. A few days later, impatient with a response, Class 1A pushed forward using Endeavor's UA alumni status to confront him despite knowing how much he doesn't like to be tricked. Shoto asks Endeavor why he's been ignoring him and if he forgot the promise they made to stop Toya together. Endeavor tries to claim that his willingness meant a lot for him, but Shoto stops his father and says it's not enough for him, and Izuku shouldn't be an exception, and proceeds to ask if he's letting Izuku and All Might work together. Endeavor refuses to answer, which is enough to tell Shoto and Katsuki. Katsuki then tells Endeavor that Izuku will never take his own health into consideration. With Principal Nezu's permission, Class 1A moves out to bring Izuku back to UA since he's welcome to come back. Once Principal Nezu gives 1A permission to bring back Izuku to UA, Shoto joins Class 1A to search for him while at the same time apprehending any prison escapees along the way. After a month of trailing in Izuku's whereabouts, Class 1A finally arrived on the scene to find Izuku in the midst of a battle between him and the villain Dictator. Shoto uses his ice to freeze the villain, and Momo conjures restraints to subdue Dictator, while Tenya, Katsuki, and Ochako confront Izuku about his behavior. Izuku attempts to make it clear to everyone he's fine, but his statement falls on deaf ears. Class 1A attempts to subdue Izuku only for him to use his superior strength and speed to escape. One of these escape attempts lands him right inside of Shoto's heaven-piercing ice wall. Shoto remarks how he notices Izuku's unhappy face and feelings and wants him to share his problems with his friends. Shoto remarks that his desire to stay away from UA and not rest could be playing into All for One's hand, which makes UA an easy target. Shoto states that UA could be protected if Deku returns. Deku ignores this and states the conflict is just between All for One and One for All. Though Class 1A continues to try and reach Izuku, he tries to ignore them by using his full speed to escape. Before he can, everyone uses their abilities to help Tenya catch up to Izuku, including Shoto using the heaven-piercing ice wall and a slope for everyone, and he uses his flash freeze heat wave to propel his classmates forward to gain some starting momentum to help them catch Izuku. He joins up with the rest of Class 1A and listens to Katsuki apologizing to Izuku before he collapses from shock and exhaustion. With Izuku safely secured, they escort him back to a heavily fortified UA High, where Class 1A is confronted by angry protesting civilians who figured out that the villains are hunting down Izuku. Due to the civilians' anxiousness, Shoto stays outside the barrier alongside a disguised Endeavor and Hawks, while the heroes inside try to convince them to let Izuku rest. Ochako gives a speech and plea to everyone that finally lets them agree to let him stay, as Shoto, Endeavor, and Hawks are invited inside by ectoplasm, with the chaos having died down. Seeing Izuku escorted inside and the civilians now supporting each other, Shoto turns to his father and tells him they're going to do it together, thinking back to Toya's face, which he solemnly agrees. Izuku is immediately thrown into the bath where the 1A boys thoroughly wash him down. After they finish, his classmates ask him various questions regarding One for All, when Shoto appears and tells everyone to leave Izuku be so he can rest. Izuku tells him he feels he can't until he apologizes to All Might for pushing him away, only for Shoto to notice All Might peering into the window. All Might enters and the two of them apologize to each other, as everyone proclaims they'll work together to fight back together. All Might then leaves the group to meet up with Endeavor and the rest of the heroes, who Shoto says isn't at the school due to wanting to keep a distance between the civilians because of Dabi's revelation. By that point, Izuku had finally fallen asleep as Shoto gives him a blanket, also saying he feels he may be a cause for concern for the others due to being Dabi's brother. Eiichiro says that he's going through a lot even though he views him as innocent, but Shoto corrects him, saying his hatred of his blood blinded him to his origin, but he feels he has changed and wants to prove it so no one will be concerned for him anymore. Kyoka thinks about Shoto's words about the evacuees not having a full change of heart yet, dragging Denki, Fumikage, Katsuki, and Momo closer to her, stating that just like the last time there were other people that regarded them with apprehension, they need to do something to reassure them and bring smiles to their faces, just like they did at the Culture Festival. Class 1A comes back together as they declare they won't just bring the world back to how it was, but make it a better place than before, and do it all together. UA Traitor Arc. 2 days later, Class 1A learns that during this time, Tomura had fought American #1 hero Star and Stripe. And while she was killed during the battle with Tomura successfully stealing her quirk, New Order, thanks to her actions, the quirk acted like a virus within his body, destroying several of his quirks and delaying his procedure by about a week. All Might informs all this to the class, telling them that this is now their perfect time to prepare for the inevitable all-out war. The class reveals over the past month they had been training with the Wild Wild Pussycats in order to keep up with Izuku in the incoming conflict and are now about to head out to continue their training. Class train amongst themselves out in the courtyard, with Shoto finally achieving equilibrium, matching his control on his left side with his right, and continues to practice on making both halves into one power so that Dabi cannot burn his body. While training, he, alongside everyone else, received news that Izuku has captured the Aoyamas and was informed of Yuga being confirmed as the traitor who isolated the class at the USJ and revealed the location of their training camp. Once the Aoyamas are restrained, he and the other class bluntly refuse to back down from the news despite Nezu's request, all stunned and in tears of Yuga's betrayal. They listen to Yuga's desperation that drove him to despair, and then Izuku's pleading to let Yuga help them. This leads the class to realize that they can use Yuga to deceive All for One and steer the villains in their direction. President Mike asks Class 1A why, with them being the greatest victims after all this, they're so willing to trust him. And Tenya simply responds that what happened is in the past, and with them being unable to realize how he's been feeling all this time, they carry some responsibility, so they must reach out to him as friends in order for them to become equals again. Shota appears on a tablet screen, taking full responsibility, and reveals that he has an idea. They all listen to Shota's plan after the Aoyama family's ears have been covered. Naomasa then has the Aoyama family escorted back to their HQ, telling everyone not to say a word to anyone else about the plan, while he and the rest of the class look on sullenly. Back at Heights Alliance, Shoto and his classmates take a breather before getting ready to gear back up, as he and everyone with fire and rage in their eyes over the betrayal prepares to bring All for One down once and for all. After reassuring that Yuga will return and help them, he and Class 1A form their search squad and head out to hunt the villains. Later that night, Class 1A ended up with nothing and no information about their whereabouts. After returning to Heights Alliance, Shoto takes a break from his search efforts, feeling incredibly tired. All Might, alongside Naomasa and Nezu, then burst into the dorm to inform the class all about their secret finalized plans for the upcoming final war. They explain to the class the full extent of their plans, that they have purposely been running themselves around to make All for One, who's presumably observing them through search, believe they're being exhausted, allowing them to catch him off guard and utilize Yuga to choose the location to lure him out. When asked about how to get around All for One being able to perceive their lies, they bring in Shota's next part of the plan, Hitoshi Shinso. To the class's further surprise, he revealed that he had trained his quirk to allow himself to be able to make people speak when brainwashed, and that they can use this in order to get the Aoyamas to communicate with All for One without affecting their emotions. When asked about what happens after they lure the villains out, and if it's possible to deploy all the heroes without being found, All Might states the heroes don't have to be there in advance, revealing Shota's next piece to use Neito to copy Kurogiri's warp gate. Shortly after the details are planned out and everyone's groups are assigned, Endeavor calls up Shoto, asking him to change, having learned that he will be the one to face Dabi. Shoto responds that Endeavor has to be the one to deal with All for One, since he's the strongest of the pro heroes left, same with how Izuku is the only one who can deal with Tomura. Endeavor tries to tell him Dabi shouldn't be his burden to bear, but Shoto insists that it's his decision and he wants to be the one to stop him, as it's his part to play, just as everyone else does to stop the villains for good. As all the boys head to the bath, Izuku talks to Shoto about his worries about him fighting Dabi, but he says it was his decision. And while his father will be annoyed he couldn't keep his promise, they'll think of it as his punishment. He tells him Dabi's existence is their family's crimes, and in order to reach what he's aiming for, he can't run from this. Shoto then shows off the phosphor technique, which gets Izuku really excited, recognizing it as his own version of Flash Fire Fist. The boy mentions that he's been focusing on it while Izuku was gone, though Shoto states training and maintaining it is still difficult. He explains that he elevates his flash fire using his right and left sides at the same time, with his heart being central to make them both manifest, creating what is akin to cold fire through his heated and chilled blood. He mentions how Endeavor wanted to use the ice to control his inner heat, while he's going the opposite direction. Now feeling more confident in affirming the reason why he was born in his family, he thanks Izuku, saying the words that he told them back at the sports festival, that it's his power. The next day, Nezu announces to the civilians within UA that Tomura will make his big move in 4 days, with Class 1A giving their thanks to everyone at the entrance, and Izuku saying he's had more than enough time to clean himself up, with them all ready to head back out. Class 1A each say their goodbye to their family members and friends, with Shoto speaking to Rei, Fuyumi, and Natsuo. Class 1A reconvenes at the makeshift fortress dubbed Troy, a fortified structure where they can stay at. Inside the dorms after moving in, Shoto thanks his friends for being there, thinking about what to do about Toya, how there's so much about him he still doesn't know about, like his favorite food, which Katsuki quips is probably udon, leaving Shoto to respond he wouldn't mind making him sit down to eat with him sometime. Final War Arc. Shoto stays with Class 1A at Troy until Izuku is contacted by Yuga and agrees to meet him at the disclosed location, a nearby parking lot. Izuku and Yuga manage to trick All For One, leading him to warp his remaining villain forces to the location, followed by the heroes utilizing Warp Gate to teleport themselves in to confront All For One and his army of villains. Dabi attempts to incinerate the heroes to hurt his father, but Shoto creates a massive ice wall that matches the power level of Dabi's flames to block it, right as he exits the Warp Gate alongside his classmates. He calls his older brother out on being stupid for not counting them in the fight, and the latter responds by yelling his name. As the battle begins, All Might springs the Troy system trap, catching all of the villains in the cages. Dabi mocks the heroes on how they didn't even last 3 seconds, but Shoto rebuffs 3 seconds was all they needed. Using his ice, Shoto shoves in as many villains into the warp gates, splitting the villains up all over the country. There, Shoto enters one of the warp gates and is teleported to Kamino, where he prepares to fight his fated duel with his eldest brother. Dabi proceeds to burn down Kamino Ward with a gigantic fire tornado, dwindling down the accompanying heroes, and reminisces on the current events being similar to the Hosu incident, as seeing that battle was what spurred him into action in the first place. Inside, Dabi is confronted by Shoto, Burnin, Kido, and Onima, lamenting how Endeavor couldn't face him and instead sent his son and his 3 sidekicks to deal with him. Onima warns Kido to stay back, since he can't withstand the heat, though Kido notes that he's been redirecting the trajectory of the air around him with his quirk, and just like he's done in the past decade, he'll continue to follow his leader's orders because he wants to. Burnin then says that even despite his family drama, Endeavor always got the job done, and now that he's entrusted them to Shoto, they have his full support, which Shoto appreciates. Shoto declares that he's not there because someone ordered him, but because he wants to be the one to stop Dabi. Dabi claims that still just makes him their dad's pawn, but Shoto replies that if he simply ignored him and tried to be a hero, then that would be true. Dabi proclaims about how this war is about the people involved, not the mindless soldiers, but the ones who want to change or destroy the world, fighting for their feelings, all representing the limitations of their superpowered society. Shoto then asks Dabi if he was alive this whole time, why didn't he come back home? As his increasingly rotting corpse starts to burn the flesh away, Dabi notes that it's only fair as his oldest brother, he will tell the story of how he became Dabi, why he's still alive, and how his flames even surpassed his father's masterpiece. Dabi explains that he survived his near-death experience and was taken by All For One after his flaming outburst. He ran away and didn't come back home, only to find his family had moved on and Shoto was now the center of Endeavor's attention. Seeing that nothing had changed in his father's attitude, he decided to reject who he was as Toya and became Dabi, now with the sole purpose of destroying Endeavor and everything he cares for, studying his hero moves to improve his skill, and keeping himself alive on his pure burning hatred. Shoto realizes through his maddening rants that Dabi has been prepared to die from the start, and with his quirk going wild, Dabi's body is reduced to a crisp husk before he moves in to attack Shoto. Standing defiant, Shoto prepares his flashfire fist, declaring he won't succeed. The increasingly combusting Dabi thanks Shoto for the chat, stating that he'll make for some fine kindling even with their dad not there. Shoto notices how Dabi's raising his temperature even faster than him with no hesitation. Dabi then tells Shoto that he's always thought about him too, before asking if he's a fan of All Might, making a spite of him by unleashing Flashfire Fist, Hell Spider, sending a wide array of fire spirals all outside the tornado. Burnin, Kido, and Onima protect Shoto as he readies his blast, but Dabi suddenly appears behind him, having used the Hell Spider as a distraction. Dabi throws a fiery punch right at Shoto's face, asking him how he felt holed up at UA with all the scared civilians as the son of Endeavor and brother of Dabi. He continues his assault, lambasting Shoto as despite being the boy born with everything, blessed with an ideal body in the right place, he still depends on everyone else, and as a half-baked puppet, he'll never make a thing of himself, unleashing a jet burn attack that blasts Shoto directly into a building. However, Shoto manages to neutralize the heat, to Dabi's surprise. He responds that he's not wrong and was full of doubt all this time, recognizing him as a half-baked dummy. Despite that, considering he thought Dabi was only ever focused on Endeavor, he was happy to hear that he's been keeping a close eye on him too. Shoto yells at Dabi that even though their dad was a madman and their family screwed up, everybody he burned to death was his own choice, and that he's not taking any more innocent lives. Dabi reacts vigorously as Shoto tells him to aim his rage at his family, unleashing his ultimate move, Flash Fire Fist, Phosphor. With Phosphor keeping Dabi's scorching flames at bay, Shoto regains the upper hand and unleashes an icebound crash, Cold Flame's Pale Blade, attack at Dabi. Yelling at him to cool his head, Dabi manages to recover using his fire, just as Shoto ends up losing control of his Phosphor due to his lack of extensive training with the technique and needs to switch it back on, just before Dabi pushes his fire into the ground, using Hell Minefield to create massive volcanic eruptions all over the battlefield, telling Shoto to just burn up and die already. Fortunately, Burning, Kido, and Onima take the brunt of the damage to protect Shoto, giving him enough time to recreate Phosphor and go after Dabi. After apologizing with the sidekickers telling him not to worry, he yells out, "Thank you," thinking about how after reclaiming so much of himself, it still seemed like everyone else was so far ahead of him. However, they were actually all already beside him. Every member of Class 1A never let anyone behind, and were always there to reassure him. Building up his fire and ice, Shoto bursts towards Dabi's chest, telling him they're going to mingle whether he likes it or not, and to stop already, blasting Dabi with his ultimate move, Great Glacier Azure, creating a gigantic wave of cold fire that shoots directly through his chest. The fire all over Kamino is frozen over by Shoto's ice as he grabs a hold of Dabi's body. With Dabi finally unconscious, the heroes cheer over Shoto's success, ready to deal with the remaining villains and Nomu. The exhausted Shoto holds on to Dabi until a couple heroes arrive to help apprehend him. Ingenium approaches Shoto, who then apologizes for ruining his engines due to his giant attack, but Ingenium tells him that there's nothing to apologize for. However, unbeknownst to him, Dabi manages to copy his Phosphor right before he covered him in ice. Shoto then watches in horror as Dabi begins to scorch both Kido and Onima alive, all the while revealing to him how he's copied his technique. Due to the fiery battle between the two brothers and the brutal fight between All For One and Endeavor, a massive cumulonimbus storm has started growing all over Japan and continues to expand, combined with a tropical typhoon nearby. Dabi's inferno continues to endlessly increase and consume the city. Tenya tries to hold Shoto back, telling him his Phosphor move took too much out of him, but Shoto can't believe that despite everyone surpassing their limits to fight, Dabi is the only one still standing. Knowing that his body won't last anymore if he tries to keep fighting Shoto, Dabi decides to abandon his brother, using his feet as jets as he prepares to fly himself directly towards Endeavor at the Gunga Mountain ruins. Shoto realizes he can still move despite reaching his limits and resolves to go after him. He cries out to his brother, telling him not to run away and calling him the half-baked one, demanding them continue their fight. But suddenly, they're shocked as Dabi is enveloped in a warp gate and teleported directly to Endeavor's location. Despite Dabi's disappearance and the inferno still around them, Shoto declares it's not over yet, supported by Tenya, both unaware that Stain is observing their determination from afar. Because of how much Phosphor took a toll on his body, Tenya tells Shoto he hasn't recovered and can't do anything yet. But he insists he's fine, yelling that All For One is about to reach Izuku and he can still fight. Tenya continues to speak about how he can only imagine the thoughts in his head having to fight his brother, wondering why this must be his emotional burden to bear, especially after all he's done and shown to him. Just then, the two receive a call in their communicators from All Might, telling them to run to Gunga as he informs them of even worse news. They learn that ever since he defeated Dabi, he has been internally compressing thermal energy inside of his body, and continues to compress even more. With all of his blue flames building up, in about 10 minutes his body will explode and cremate everything within 5 kilometers in a massive nuclear blast. In addition, several of the UA evacuation blocks are trapped directly within the blast radius. All Might warns them about all this, telling Tenya to run there, and telling Shoto that after overcoming so many hardships, he knows his mind and body are one. Shoto worries about All For One, but All Might simply says that a powerful ally is waiting to deal with him. He continues to tell Shoto that he has the utmost respect to those who still continue to fight even with doubts, telling him to stop Dabi and reassure everyone to become the best of himself, and that they need the two of them and their quirks together to avert the disaster. Initially, Shoto is worried that Tenya is unable to run all the way to Gunga since his engine was stalled, but he simply responds that the rain cooled his engines off, reminding Shoto his legs exist to guide wayward children. Tenya puts his mask and armor on Shoto as he blasts off at his maximum speed while carrying Shoto across the city to reach Gunga. On their way to the battlefield, Dabi's internal combustion is starting to take into effect as the villain's body implodes into an infernosphere that starts to expand outwards, causing everyone to retreat from the blast zone. Shoto creates a makeshift fighter jet made out of ice and powered by Tenya's engines, using the ice to minimize their drag and his heat to reduce friction. Shoto reactivates his Phosphor once again while the rest of Tenya's armor starts to blast off him as they rush to Dabi, minutes away from his nuclear explosion. As Tenya's engine begins to reach its limit, he tells Shoto it's as far as he can take him, which Shoto thanks him for. Utilizing phosphor, the two combine their abilities for one final burst of speed. Tenya's engine finally gives out, causing him to crash. Regardless, Tenya yells out to Shoto, thanking him for helping him become who he wants to be, so he needs to make it happen for him too. Shoto is flung forward and begins to run towards the fiery inferno. As he enters his raging infernosphere, Shoto thinks back to a letter he wrote to his mother during school, where he explains in order to reach his classmates' level, he's making an effort to speak with them daily, and while it sometimes leads to conflict, it has led to a better understanding of how they feel. He wants to be like his friends and get angry and cry, not just for themselves but for the sake of others, and that's how he wants to be too. Shoto enters the vicinity where the rest of his family is already there trying to contain Dabi, who's on the verge of exploding. As the two screaming brothers look at each other, thinking about their origins, Shoto wonders if they only butted heads sooner, since there's still arguments he wants to have and things he wants to say. He surpasses his limits and unleashes a full blast of his great glacial Aegir on Dabi, completely consuming the inferno in his ice, stopping Dabi's self-destruction and causing his fire to begin to dissipate and burn out. From the hazy fog, Shoto emerges victorious while standing and looking down at the crisped and partially frozen Dabi. He speaks to the rest of his recovering family, admitting that it was good that they were there to help because his great glacial Aegir might not have been enough to stop it, since Dabi's blue flames have been increasingly getting hotter, far beyond his reach, figuring he was not the masterpiece creation after all. Dabi's body begins to freeze from the inside out, and he can only croakily vent out to everyone, including himself, to just die. As Dabi lays there dying, a severely wounded Endeavor crawls towards his son, remorsefully apologizing to him for not going to Sakato Peak. Dabi responds that he hates him and his family, and Endeavor continues to break down, saying to let him have it, apologizing to Rei, Fuyumi, Natsuo, and Shoto for everything as well. Shortly afterwards, Shoto collapses from his injuries and falls unconscious after overexhausting himself. Just then, the rest of the Todoroki family sense the dangerous threat of Himiko's doubles swarming towards their location, decimating everything in their path. By the time the ocean reaches their location, Endeavor drags his family underneath him to shield them as best as he can. However, thanks to Ochako and the heroes, the ocean of doubles disintegrates in the air with the Todoroki surviving the storm. Shortly after Shoto regains consciousness, recovery robots have reached the Todoroki's location and have begun to escort them away to recover for their injuries. At the same time, Shota had managed to regain control of Kurogiri, and has begun warping himself all around to gather up all the heroes who can still fight to provide reinforcements for the final battle. Natsuo tells Endeavor and Shoto that Rei and Fuyumi have had enough heat, and for them to get going and use whatever strength they have left. After all the remaining heroes, including most of Class 1A, have been warped to Mount Fuji to assist Izuku in his fight against All For One, Shoto and Endeavor's warp gates appear right above the villain, ambushing him as they blast him with a dual Flashfire Fist combo attack. Right as they do so, Hanta is there to grab them with its tape and pull them to safety, having just before then stating his feelings regarding Shoto's personal issues and how it affected his growth, telling him that's what he's been thinking ever since Shoto defeated Dabi and what he wanted to say to him. The villain unleashed hordes of quirk attacks all over the battlefield, blasting away every hero who gets in his way, but they all keep countering against his attacks. Shota then calls out to the heroes through their comms, telling them to help Izuku carve a straight path to Tomura. As Izuku makes his way through the horde of quirks, Shota shouts at Izuku to do your best. Soon, Izuku manages to get in direct contact with All For One and bashes a smash right through his chest. As Izuku landed a fatal blow on All For One, Tomura's body began to fall apart from the attack. Kurogiri then mustered the last of his strength and rushed forward, warping himself right in between the hero and villain. Katsuki arrives and asks Shoto to make an ice ramp that can guide him to Izuku. Shoto does so, and Katsuki flings himself up and kills Kurogiri with an explosion from his mouth. Now that Kurogiri was dealt with, Izuku lands the final blow to Tomura, smashing his fist with his own. Eventually, Izuku defeats Tomura once and for all, as he succumbs to his injuries and dies as his body disintegrates into ash. 1 week after the end of the final war, the restoration efforts that were stalled after the Jaku hospital raid have picked back up at a breakneck pace, as heroes from around the world arrive to provide support and resources in rescue and rebuilding Japan. Shoto was still recovering from his fight with Dabi until he can return to the partially rebuilt UA. Weeks later, it's now June, and the third-year students at UA are finally having their graduation after the end of the final war. Shoto attends the UA High graduation along with the rest of his classmates. He watches the third years receive their diplomas, including Tamaki, Nejire, and Mirio. Present Mike, who's emceeing the event, apologizes for the delayed graduation and shouts for excitement, and the third years enthusiastically join in, while the former second years watching are starting to get the gist of it, and the former first years watch speechless. Mawata Fua comes to the stage to give the students a farewell speech. After Mawata Fua gives the farewell address as the students' representative, President Meg calls on the graduate's representative, Mirio. He starts off his speech with a sincere statement thanking everyone for being in attendance, befuddling them all for not starting off with a gag, but reminds everyone they lost so much and gained nothing, and that a hero's fight is to bring a negative situation back to square one. He concludes that a world without smiles and humor has no bright future, that they seek a positive world where people can live their lives in good cheer, and that's the finish line they're racing towards. He thinks for Night Eye to check him out as he snaps, using his quirk to blast off into the air, shouting to his underclassmen just as Bibimi Kenranzaki unleashes her giant robot on the cheering crowd. Later after graduation, Class 1A has become 2A and are moved to a temporary classroom. Shota states that they were supposed to be getting a different homeroom teacher, but due to the circumstances, he will be their homeroom teacher for another year, to the students' excitement. Just then, Yuga enters to say his goodbyes since he will be leaving UA for good, even despite the class's insistence, and both Shota and Naomasa saying he could stay. Yuga says he wants to make matters right, since the only reason he came to the school was because of All for One's orders, and he doesn't believe he deserves a graduation. He vows to atone for his crimes, and will once more walk the path of a hero, and as he places a piece of cheese in front of Izuku's mouth, says it'll be fine, since he reached out to all of them and took their hands. He promises that someday he will be worthy of standing beside them all, and reveals another surprise to the class. Hitoshi will be taking his place as Class A's newest member. Later, several Class A students discuss how new first years will be coming soon, and they'll be senpais starting tomorrow. Izuku asks Shoto if he'll be going to Yuga's farewell party, and he says he will as long as it isn't today, telling Izuku he's feeling good. He prepares himself to head for Central Hospital where Dabi is in the process of surgery. After surgery, Shoto and the rest of the Todoroki family came to visit Toya, who's contained in a life-supporting medical pod, the only thing that's keeping him alive. Natsuo and Fuyumi tell an arriving Shoto that he didn't need to come, with Rei saying the same thing to the two of them. Enji states that's the same for her, as Shoto tells them that they aren't all here out of the sense of duty. The officers inform the Todorokis that Toya can speak, but only for a few minutes per day, and because of his heavily mutilated body, he's facing a slow death. Toya opens his eyes to see his family, commenting how everyone's here as if he's a tourist attraction, before starting to heavily cough. Enji tells him that they're here to tell him that he's retiring as a hero. He states that he's always planned once the war is over, but now he can't even stand up on his own, saying that Endeavor the hero has died and burned away, and Toya's flames were always stronger than his. Toya sarcastically gives his condolences, remarking that he shouldn't be trying to play nice after everything's over, calling him a coward. Enji remarks that he's right because he knows him too well since he's always kept a close eye on him, and only ever wanted him to watch him. But he never did. He continues that despite what some people may say, his hell flame burns inside Toya, and that he's been watching the video denouncing him every single day. He concludes saying from now on he will come visit every day so they can talk, even if it may be too late. Toya's heart races, with his heart rate continuing to increase, with the officer informing them that even further strain could be too dangerous. The officer tells the Todorokis they can return tomorrow. Before they leave, Shoto wanted to ask one last question, and asks Toya what his favorite food is. He initially doesn't answer, making them believe he's reached his limit, and to let him rest, but he then responds, soba. Shoto was surprised that his eldest brother ironically likes the same food he likes, and tells him that soba is his favorite food too. Unbeknownst to him, Toya begins to tear up and apologizes to Shoto. Once outside, Natsuo tells Enji that he's done. Nothing's changed about how he feels, and he doesn't want anything to do with Enji anymore, adding that he and his girlfriend are getting married, but without a wedding and without him meeting her, which Enji understands and apologizes for. Fuyumi then reveals that she quit her teaching job, but one of the students' mothers found her a new job to provide support. Natsuo then says that they've taken responsibility and punishments have been doled out, wondering if that's enough, and Enji states he will be making amends and apologizing for his sins for the rest of his life. He says even if they're around to see it or not, he will shield the kids from the fallout to the best of his ability, and this is the reason why he survived. Natsuo tells him it sounds like hell, and Enji says it's been like that since he took him up on his offer to tango. Natsuo then awkwardly responds that he never thought of his dad as a badass until this moment. As Shoto is about to head back to school with Natsuo and Fuyumi, he calls out to Enji and Rei, saying that he'll be okay because he has his classmates there for him, and that he'll be the man he wants to become. Whew! And that wraps up nearly 10 years of My Hero Academia, especially for Shoto Todoroki. What do you think of My Hero? Do you expect there to be a My Hero sequel, just like how Naruto has Boruto and Fairy Tail has their sequels? Same with let us know in the comments below. And did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.